Hello dear viewers, support me by subscribing to my channel and share my video if you like it, and also make sure you comment your thought. Now let's start the video. Tormund. News of the oncoming clan leaders from the Dreadfort worried Tormund. There were more than 20,000 free folk and over 60 giants. Of course there would be trouble. But of what kind was the concern? They were south finally, but they intended on remaining free. Jon had told him some of many laws of the north that would have to be followed, and some of them were not pleasing to the free folk. Only Jon ever had the ability to convince them to do things they've never done whether they liked it or not, and Tormund was always there to support him. But now he would have to handle things alone, and he had little faith in himself to do it, since he too did not fully understand some of the restrictions. Despite his willingness to try and handle things on his own, he knew he would need someone he trusted to support him. The only problem was, there wasn't anyone around he had much trust in. The Starks were friendly with him, but they didn't understand the free folk as Jon did, and none of the other lords of the north had any care for the them, only tolerance, but it seems even that was fading away. However, this gave him the perfect opportunity to have a talk with the blonde beauty Brienne. Since he wasn't allowed to steal her, he would have to get to her the way Southerners did, by bonding. From what he was told, she had taken watch duty somewhere on the eastern battlements of the castle. He walked along them, hoping to find her, but he was unsuccessful. Something that caught his attention was the dragon that he rode on, returning from its disappearance, flying over the castle. Tormund heard some commotion from the fields and looked out to them and saw Brienne and two of the guards with her. He could barely hear her shouting at them as she dug through the snow at someone wearing a crow's cloak. "Get help! The king is alive!" Tormund became dumbstruck for a moment, needing to repeat what she said in his mind. She was digging out Jon from the snow. He immediately ran as fast as he could down from the battlements and to the gates. The two guards that were with Brienne met him and were both in as much shock as he was. "Wildling," one said, "the king's returned. Help him in with the lady while we get the maester." "Get out of the way then," he told them. But before any of them could do anything, they all heard a deafening screech. Tormund hoped to never hear south of the wall. "Fuck no," he said, as he ran through the gates, and stopped to see Brienne being choked by a blue-eyed demon that had stolen the face of Jon. "No!" He ran as fast as he could at them, faster than he'd ever run away from the whites. "Damn you! Damn you! Damn you! Gods damn you!" When he got close enough, Tormund tackled Jon off of Brienne, letting out a howl, and he plummeted into the snow and wrestled with him. Jon growled and screeched as they fought against one another. They both got their feet and faced each other, Tormund not recognizing what stood before him. Jon was dressed in the fur boots and breeches he wore beyond the wall, but his chest and arms were bare, revealing the scars of his first death. He let out another inhuman screech as he charged forward. He didn't have Longclaw at his side, so Tormund had no reason to draw his sword. He easily stepped to the side and slammed his arm against Jon's head, knocking him into the snow. The cloak he wore slid off from Jon's body and into the snow. But Jon's speed was great, and his movements were like a wild animal. He got back up to his feet quickly and grabbed hold of Tormund. With an unnatural strength, Jon threw Tormund behind him into the snow and ran at him again. Jon jumped into the air as Tormund got to his knees and was brought back down. Within an instant of being tackled, Jon sank his teeth onto Tormund's left ear and ripped it off. Tormund yelled as he threw Jon off his body and ignored the injury. What he didn't notice was that Jon managed to steal his sword from him. Jon slashed as fast as he could and Tormund could only dodge, but the snow they were in was deep enough to slow him down. Jon managed to land a nasty cut across Tormund's right cheek, just barely getting his nose. Tormund rushed to Jon and grabbed the wrist that held the sword with one hand and grabbed Jon's neck with the other to keep his teeth away. From behind Tormund, Brienne rushed to Jon and pried Tormund's blade from Jon's fingers, and tossed it far away. She got behind Jon and wrapped her arms around Jon's and locked her hands behind Jon's back. Jon kicked and squirmed violently before throwing his head back and slamming it into Brienne's nose. She failed to dodge the blow, but even as the blood poured from her nose, she wouldn't let go. Several guards finally arrived before things got worse. One of them was smart enough to bring a rope and began to bind Jon's legs, while the others just stood with their swords drawn at the ready. "Drop your fucking weapons," Tormund ordered. They all looked at him questioningly, not obeying. Tormund looked at each of them directly. If you don't, I'll do to you what I did to that Umber cunt when we fought the Bolton bastard." Everyone frightfully sheathed their swords as Jon's hands were finally tied and he became incapacitated. He had enough damage done to his body. He didn't need any more scars. The guard who bound Jon picked up his feet, struggling to keep his grip as Jon wriggled constantly. "Take him to the courtyard. The people need to see this." "Are you sure?" Brienne asked, surprised he would suggest such a thing. "Cover his chest at least. They don't need to see the wounds the dead gave him." "Yes, they do." He looked at her, fully composed of seriousness for the first time. "Why?" "Because the dead didn't give him those, the Night's Watch did." Tormund picked up the cloak and folded it under his arm as he led everyone back to the castle, Jon continuing to growl and squirm. The moment they entered the gates, everyone in the castle within eyesight turned their eyes and immediately stopped what they were doing, horrified at what they saw. Tormund stopped in the middle of the courtyard and waited for as many people gather around. On the balconies, Tormund saw Sansa and Rickon Stark with the Queen, Jorah Mormont, the Tarly Crow, and the Foreign Lady. At the front of the crowd around him, the Lannister dwarf, his bald friend, and the Hound pushed their way through and gazed at their king. Tormund didn't say anything, he just let everyone take in what was before them. Finally, he gestured his hand to Jon. "Do you see this?" He spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. "The Night King did this. His magic defiled your king after death." He then pointed his finger at the scars on Jon's chest. "But these were given to him by his so-called brother crows. They did this to him after he led us wildlings through the wall. He died once for doing the right thing, and he died again to make sure every one of you Southerners would finally realize that the things you still believe to be stories are in fact a living nightmare." Tormund reached inside of his furs on his chest and pulled out a dragonglass dagger he kept with him at all times. "No one should have to suffer this, especially not a great man like him." He looked up to the Dragon Queen, mentally asking for permission to free Jon from this condition. Tears were already on her cheeks, but she kept her emotions to herself. She nodded ever so slightly to him. Tormund raised his dagger high, but as he brought it down, someone called out to him, "Stop." The tip of the dagger was mere inches away from Jon's heart, before Tormund stopped. He looked to who shouted and saw the Red Woman walking through the crowd as people parted ways for her. She was followed by her escort and the Brotherhood men. She walked up to Jon's bound body and he seemed to turn his attention towards her, trying to bite at her. "If you break the spell with that dagger, then he will be lost to us forever." She kept her gaze on his eyes, mesmerized at the color. "You brought him once. You can do it again," Tormund said confidently. "The fire within him hasn't gone out yet, it is only embers. He still has time before they fade into the darkness, but if you use that dagger the effects will only quicken his fate." "Then how do you plan to bring him back?" At this point, Daenerys had walked down the balcony and up to the Red Woman. "You can save him?" she asked, desperately. The Red Woman looked at Daenerys, knowing she already knew the answer. "I brought him back once, but this is different. He is dead, but the Night King's magic has turned death into a cage around the fire within him. We can't break it down or open the door. It has to melt from the inside out." "How?" "You already know the price for such a thing. Only death can pay for life." Daenerys clasped at her belly, where her babies within her were growing. "I can't give up their lives. I won't." She began to look fearful of the Red Woman. "Jon would never forgive me again if I sacrificed his children's lives for his." The Red Woman smiled at her, remaining calm. "You have nothing to be afraid of, my queen. The payment shall be given, but it won't be you or your children that suffer such a fate." She turned her gaze to Brienne. "If you could, take him back to the fields, but farther out." Brienne looked over to Daenerys, not sure if she should obey. The queen looked at her and nodded. Brienne and the guard both adjusted their grips before walking back. The way they came through the gates, the Red Woman following closely, only a few followed them out to the fields of snow. Tormund, Daenerys, Jorah, Tyrion, and the Bald Man. Everyone else climbed to the battlements and looked over the walls or stuck close to the castle gates. "Lady Melisandre," the Bald Man called out. She stopped and turned to face him as he approached her, while Brienne and the guard continued to carry Jon out into the snow. "I have never been a believer of gods, and I believe those that preach of them even less. Yet why is it that I have faith in you? Ever since a mistake I made long ago, I've been careful about what I do. I follow visions, but I wait for the answers rather than guess them. I saw that my purpose was here, and now here I am, to fulfill my duty and my punishment. Then I assume that this is goodbye." She simply smiled at him. "It's never truly goodbye. We may see each other again one day." He bowed his head to her, looking at ease. "Then if that's the case, I shall not say it." She turned back and began to return to the ones who carried Jon, but hesitated after a few steps. "Do you remember the name you heard in the flames?" She didn't even turn her head when she asked. "I never forget a thing. The one who it belongs to is coming. Make sure she hears it." She resumed to walk to Jon's body. The bald man remained behind with the dwarf, but Tormund continued to follow with Daenerys and Jorah. "That's far enough," Melisandre called out to Brienne and the guard as they stopped at a thin layer of snow. Melisandre turned to Daenerys and everyone who followed. "This is as far as you go." She took Daenerys' hand and held it softly. "Have no fear, my queen, for dragons do not fear the power of gods." She released her hand and walked to where Jon was being kept, which was only about 40 paces away from them. Tormund and the others could barely hear what she was saying from where they were. "Set him down and go be with the others." Brienne and the guard followed her instructions and laid Jon in the snow. He struggled constantly to be free, but to no avail. Melisandre waited for Brienne and the guard to be next to everyone before looking out to the castle. A moment later, the winds began to blow, but the force wasn't natural. From behind, all 4 of the dragons flew to the field and landed in the snow, surrounding Melisandre and Jon. She knelt down to him and began to say her prayer that was near a whisper, but was heard by all by some mysterious power. "Lord of light, come to us in our darkness. The light within him fades and must be returned. Guide him through the shadows and back into life." She placed a hand over his cheek, and Jon suddenly held still. "Baptize him in fire, that his embers may become an inferno, to battle against the ice. Baptize him in heat, that he may warm those he protects against the colds of winter. Baptize him in light, that he may lead his people out of the darkness and into the dawn. For the night is dark and full of terrors." The Brotherhood and the escort repeated Melisandre's final words in a chorus. Without giving any form of order, all 4 of the dragons pulled their necks back before unleashing a fury of fire from their mouths. The flames consumed Jon and Melisandre, and after a second of burning, the fires turned from yellow and orange to a crimson red. Melisandre could barely be seen with her eyes closed and smiling before she turned. She was turned into sparks that glided away from the flames and into the sky. Jon's bounds broke and he stood up, screeching as the fire continued to surround him, but unaffected his body. He looked directly up to the sky as his voice echoed all the way to the castle. Moments later, his screeching began to morph into shouts of pain that were made by the living. He fell to his hands and knees right before the fire stopped. The snow around Jon had melted, but the grass beneath it was untouched. The dragons began to growl nervously as Jon slowly stood up. He looked at those who watched him, the cold blue of his eyes gone, and the brown returned. The dragons all screeched loudly into the sky, sounding victorious. Jon began to breathe deeply as he started to walk forward, but after only taking 3 steps, he collapsed onto his front and didn't get back up. Tormund wanted to rush after him, but the heat radiating from where Jon had just been was still too much. The only one who could go after him was Daenerys, and she did so, quickly. She knelt down to him and turned him over, resting his head on her lap before breaking down in tears, but she was happy and he was alive. The heat suddenly vanished, allowing for everyone else to assist the king and queen. Tormund slid to his knees as he got next to Jon and Daenerys, looking at his condition. He looked all right. In fact, he looked like he was only sleeping. "Let's get him inside," Tormund suggested before a hand firmly grasped his shoulder. "We'll take him inside," Beric said. "You and Lady Brienne, get your wounds looked at. You are still stained with your own blood." He moved past Tormund and knelt down to Daenerys' lap. "Forgive me, your grace," he said as he slid his arms underneath Jon's back and lifted him up at his shoulders. Angie lifted Jon's legs and they began to walk back to the castle. As Brienne helped Daenerys up, Tormund took the cloak from under his arm and quickly wrapped it over Jon's body. "We don't need the entire north to see their king's pecker." He earned the amused smiles of the Brotherhood, and even Daenerys. The dragons behind them waited until they were a good distance away before spreading their wings and flying back to their nesting area, on the other side of the castle. While Jon was being examined by Maester Vulcan in his solar, Tormund and Brienne were being looked at by the Tarly Crow. The lad did a fine job of cleaning their wounds and stitching Tormund's cheek. He was currently examining Brienne's nose, while Tormund sat down with a cold, wet cloth pressed to his head where he was missing an ear. "All right," Tarly said as he positioned himself in front of Brienne with his hands near her head. "I'm afraid this may hurt more than you'd like." "Just do what you need to," Brienne told him. The Tarly boy carefully placed his hands onto Brienne's cheeks and positioned his thumbs on her nose. "One quick question. Is that sword Valyrian steel?" His eyes looked down to the golden-hilted sword strapped on Brienne's hip. "It's called Oathkey." The Tarly boy pushed her nose back into place, and after a quiet pop sounded, a loud roar followed, as Brienne fell forward, grasping at her nose. "Fuck, that hurt." "More than you'd like." He gave her an innocent look as she glared at him. She's starting to laugh at him after the pain began to fade. "Yes, it did." Tarly smiled at her as he set a bloodied rag into a water basin. "It looks like you also have some bruises around your neck. I'll get some ointment that will help heal them quicker." He left Tormund and Brienne, and the two of them were alone together in the room. There was a long, awkward silence that lasted longer than it should have. It felt like Tarly was taking his sweet time. "It was a brave thing you would have done," Brienne said openly. "What?" "Choosing to use the dragon glass to free Jon from being an undead soldier. I don't think there would be many who knew him well who could do it. No one should be one those things. I've lost friends and family to the walkers, and I've had to kill them all the same before they could turn me into what they'd become." He looked directly at her. "I expect anyone who considers me a friend to do the same. If I won't become a slave to the fucking Night King." For the first time, Brienne didn't look uncomfortable by Tormund's presence. "Then promise me you'll do the same if that happens to me." "I promise." Tricia. The morning sun rose with a beautiful light, a kind of which was never seen before. Instead of the silver blue, followed by the pale gold, the morning was like molten gold and amber. The clouds erupted like fire, setting the sky ablaze in a pinkish red. There was color present that no one could have ever imagined existed. Riverrun Castle might as well have been home to nothing but Lannister soldiers. There were only 3 Tully soldiers among 400 wearing Lannister red. The 3 who did live in the castle were the commanding officers, kept prisoner with freedom to walk about the grounds at will. But even then, they had no care for the activities the Lannisters around them did. In fact, hardly anyone gave second look to anyone, which made getting inside the castle more than easy for Tristan Hills. With a new set of stolen armor and a red cloak, walking into the castle without trouble was the easiest thing so far about this entire task. Making his way through the hallways, Tristan used these moments to scout the layout and listen to whispers about anything that would be of use to make things easier. The things he heard as he passed men sneaking quick meals in the hallways and sparring in the yard were very interesting. "I heard Lady Tully singing to her son from outside her chambers last night. Only time I ever heard her my whole stay here. One of the ladies' cooks died of fever last week. Good thing he did, the new one's a lot better. I saw the Frey woman sitting on her windowsill one night. Can't believe she's related to Walder. Do you think if we declare for the imp in the north he'll let us go home? Gotta feel bad for the woman and the boy. They've been locked in that room for months without a day to walk about. The commander's a bit of an ass if you ask me. We got a raven from the twins about some deserter saying a girl killed some soldiers. Hope it was Orlik and his troop fucking hated them. Raven from King's Landing came today. Wish the commander would let us send a few of our own, for once." Tristan had all he needed to know what to do. Commander Cameron Lefford was practically the only one who ever received any news from King's Landing. His orders were absolute in the Riverlands. If he were to say the Queen ordered the men to leave, then they would obey. Though there were some to maybe many of whom were considering the option of serving Tyrion Lannister, who they were convinced was on the winning side. Maybe when the time came, this could be exploited to get them to change their thoughts into action. The North was in need of more men to fight against the dead anyway. Tristan would figure out what to do as Commander Lefford once the time came, but for now he had to figure out when the time to strike would be, and how. The commander was constantly busy, and never alone. More than one person would probably have to die with him. Unfortunately, there was no more poison left over from Tristan's demise. Then there was the problem with time. The Lannister armor took a while to take off and just as long to put on. With how busy the commander was, there wasn't a frame of time that Tristan could make the switch. Night was the best possible chance when everyone was asleep, but even then, the commander shared a room with 4 others who happened to be lieutenants, and their absence would be questioned. So that route was to be avoided. The only option left would be when the commander had his visits with Roslyn, to deliver any Raven scrolls from the twins or if she had any requests. If she would keep quiet about a death in her room, then things would be easy, except for the part about getting into the room. The only ones allowed to enter were the handmaidens, the wet nurses, the commander, and a select few servants, all of whom except the commander were escorted by guards and under surveillance. The room itself only had 1 door, but it also had 2 windows that someone small enough could fit through. Tristan was certainly too large for such a task, but Arya Stark was not. The faceless men specialized in hiding in plain sight, but such a thing was impossible with how much activity happened and the lack of time Arya had at her disposal. She was forced to keep to the shadows. Armed with needle and the Valyrian dagger, the rest of her things were hidden away near some trees, not far from the castle. She kept herself dressed in only her tunic, riding breeches and boots. Commander Lefford was due to deliver a Raven scroll to Roslyn very soon, and Arya had to be there to meet him. She never possessed Bran's climbing skills that he once had, but the tower that held Roslyn's chambers was worn out enough that almost anyone her size could ascend it. As Tristan, she saw the best route that was in the path of a blind spot where no one would be able to see her. After a guard walked his pass on one of the castle battlements, Arya came out of the shadows and climbed onto the ledge. She lowered herself to the outside of the wall and carefully moved across the stone. There were small enough gaps in various places of the brickwork, and some of the stone was out of place, enough to grab a hold. Bran always made it look easy, but the strength needed for such a thing was more than Arya expected. She took her time to get the best grip as she climbed up the tower to one of the windows. One wrong move, and she would slip and fall into the cold river and be swept away by the swift current. Arya finally managed to get a grip onto the edge of the window and pull herself up. When she managed to get her head up to look inside, she became surprised at the quality of the room. She expected it to only be simple and have few luxuries, but inside was more decorated than the room she had in the Red Keep. Roslyn was sitting on her bed facing away from her while Stefan played with some toy knights on the floor in front of her. Arya crept through the window silently and caught the attention of Stefan. He pointed at her before Roslyn turned around and gasped. Arya had never seen Roslyn before and was surprised at what she looked like. She was very pretty with a mousy face, and no one would think her to be a Frey. She took a few steps back and pulled her son to her, keeping caution to her intruder. Arya held her arms up, revealing she wasn't currently armed, and kept her distance. "Lady Roslyn, I'm not here to harm you." "Who are you?" she asked fearfully. "Someone who you can trust to help you." Outside the door, noises could be heard, and Arya could tell that Commander Lefford was coming. Arya reached behind her back and drew her dagger, walking to the side of the door that would swing to her. She looked over to Roslyn and held her finger to her lips, signaling for silence. Arya nearly forgot that Roslyn had a 3-year-old clinging to her side. "Cover his eyes." Roslyn turned her son around and kept his face on her dress. The door opened, and in walked Commander Cameron Lefford, who closed the door behind him. Lady Tully, a raven from the twins, arrived. Arya silently crept up behind him, but the reactions of Roslyn and Stefan gave away Arya's position. When she held up the dagger to strike at his neck, Commander Lefford swung his arm behind him as he twisted his body, knocking Arya to the side on the ground. "Guards!" he called out as he drew his sword. Arya got back to her feet, as 3 other Lannister soldiers entered the room with their swords drawn. "Oh, damn it all!" She quickly sheathed the dagger and switched to using needle. Keeping her thoughts calm like the river, she took her stance and waited for the guards to make the first move. "Take her alive!" Lefford ordered. The 3 guards started to slowly approach Arya, all of them keeping their free hands in front of them to block or parry whatever Arya had to give to them. The one on the left stepped forward and swung his sword at Arya in hopes to catch her off guard. But Arya easily ducked under the sword and moved forward to him, planting needle up into his chin and retracting it out within mere seconds. His body fell to the floor. Roslyn gasped and pulled Stefan into the corner of the room. The other 2 charged at her at the same time. She was able to parry a strike with needle and another by quickly drawing the dagger with her free hand. Lefford joined in the fight, and his skill was far better than his men, almost as good as Brienne's. The only reason she didn't beat him yet was because there were two others she had to deal with. With the dagger in her right hand, Arya managed to land a strike on one of the guards on the hand that held his sword. All of his fingers, except his thumb, were cut off. He fell backwards, grunting and clenching at his wounds, and he bled. Arya ducked under a sword strike and to gain an advantage and stabbed the last guard in his knee with needle. He screamed out as the blade twisted deep and blood began to spill out. Unforeseen by Arya, the guard grabbed onto her arm and prevented her from escaping. Before she could attack him with the dagger, Commander Lefford swung his sword down at Arya. Using all her strength, she pulled back and Lefford's sword cut through the Alpha's guard. But the power of the swing was great enough that it also cut through needle and broke the blade, to 2 inches above the guard. Arya fell onto he back and dropped what was left of needle as the guard screamed out at his newly made stump of an arm. Before she could get up, Lefford thrusted his sword down at her. Arya parried it with a dagger, but she didn't see that Lefford had drawn his own. He stabbed it down at her, and she had nothing to protect herself with. She couldn't allow herself to die, so she raised her arm and caught the blade. It pierced through her forearm between her bone, but with it stuck there she was able to move it out of the way. She gritted her teeth and wanted to scream out, but she did her best to hold it in. Without hesitating, Arya swung the Valyrian dagger up at Commander Lefford and slashed him across his arm. The pain was enough for him to let go of his knife and back away from her. As Arya scrambled to her feet, she foolishly dropped her dagger to look at the one in her arm. Before she could pull it out, Lefford was already back on his feet and out of breath, and 3 more guards entered. "Get these 2 to the Maester and put her in a cell." Before anyone could do anything, Arya darted for the window and without even thinking, leapt out of the tower. The instant her body impacted against the icy cold water, she was washed over with feeling of self-loathing, frustration, and embarrassment. How could I have fucked up so badly? When she surfaced out of the water, she struggled to stay afloat as the pain in her arm continued, and the cold temperatures made her desperate to breathe as much as she could. As the castle grew smaller in the distance, bells could be heard signaling that there was a break-in. Arya didn't get far before a party of riders exited Riverrun and turned downstream to Arya's direction. Putting all thoughts aside and only focusing on surviving, Arya did her best to swim the side of the river that was polluted with many trees, and away from the riders. As Arya climbed out of the water, her wound stung greatly, as snow and mud touched the impaled flesh. She did her best to contain the pain within herself, before an arrow shot into a tree next to her. She started to run as quick as she could through the woods before her, losing sight of the riders within seconds. Though her pace was slow and her body wouldn't stop shivering, she kept moving and wouldn't allow herself to stop. It wasn't even an hour, and Arya had become lost in her escape. Though the skies were clear and the sun gave heat, the air around the land was cold and would bite at any opportunity. Arya wanted to take the blade out, but if she did, then she would start to bleed more than she already was. She was currently in the middle of attempting to get her bearings. She had to find some place to hide, or someone to help her. Maybe some Tully soldiers were nearby. She kept walking past the trees. The forest at this point was more open. As she slowly trudged through the snow, she could hear a noise in the distance. It was the sound of horses galloping. Arya scanned through the trees and saw riders wearing red in the distance behind her. She picked up her pace, but the deepness of the snow tripped her, and she couldn't get up. She was so cold that her arm had numbed and she no longer felt the pain of the dagger, but she knew that her injury was worsening. Moments later, she was pulled out from the snow and sat up by the Lannister soldiers. "Is she the one?" one of them asked. "There's a dagger in her arm. Of course, it's her." Another confirmed. "Best leave the knife in her, or she might bleed to death." "Don't want that to happen yet." She was picked up and sat against a tree. In front of her, kneeling down, was Commander Lefford, and he was joined by 15 Lannister soldiers. "I heard from some of my men that 3 red cloaks were killed by a girl on their way to the twins. Was that you?" There was no point in denying it now. Arya gave what passed for a nod. Two. They attacked many and I defended myself." Foe. She couldn't contain her shivering and she wasn't getting any warmer. The horses started to whine and grow restless, as Commander Lefford looked legitimately impressed with her. "That doesn't explain what you were doing in the Lady Tully's chambers." "Kill her," Ira had to make up something believable. If they knew she was there to rescue Rosalind, then they would punish her or Stefan. Some of the others in my family died at Tad. The twins. Oh, the Red Wedding? Lefford asked. Arya nodded simply and could feel her face going numb. Makes sense. Lots of people in the Riverlands hate the Freys for what they did. But then again, it was the boy they called King who broke his vows just to fuck that foreign slut. Lefford reached behind his back and revealed the Valyrian dagger. Now I would have believed you had I not found this left in the tower. Where'd you get this? Stole it. Liar, he spat. No one lets Valyrian steel get stolen from them. The horses began to jerk around and some of their riders lost their grips on the reins. What in seven hell's the matter? Lefford stood up and inspected the horses with his men. From around them amongst the trees, noises of twigs snapping and creatures running could be heard. Moments later, snarling and growls became apparent, and the men became scared. Some even drawing their swords. In the corner of Arya's eye, she saw movements past the trees beyond. Suddenly wild barks were made, and wolves appeared from the trees, in packs, attacking the Lannister men. The ones who hadn't drawn their weapons were the first to suffer and die of mauling in the throat. There was catastrophe and chaos among the remaining soldiers, and some even tried to flee, but the horses were too riled up to let anyone ride them. One of the wolves was struck by a sword and impaled afterwards. It whined as the guard drew his blade from the wolf's belly, but he would not be boasting of the deed anytime soon. A large white wolf dove on top of the guard and bit at his neck. With a small tug, the white wolf ripped the man's head clean off. The wolf turned to Arya and revealed his ruby-red eyes. Ghost? Arya croaked. His attention was fixated on her while one of the remaining soldiers tried to attack from behind. But another large wolf leapt from out of nowhere and tore the soldier's arm off and continued to kill. Screams filled the air as at least 24 wolves were ripping the soldiers from limb to limb. It only took minutes for the snows to turn red, and all of the men who wore red were lying dead in pieces. All of the fur of the wolves had many stained of red from their mouths to their paws. They surrounded Arya and became tame as Ghost slowly approached her, with Nymeria next to him. Hello, girl. Nymeria's eyes looked at Arya's arm and she began to whimper quietly. Arya just smiled at her. I made a mistake. Arya looked over to Ghost, glad to see him just as much as her direwolf. You should head home, Ghost. Rickon misses you. Ghost just stared at her blankly like he would to everyone except Jon. Arya did her best to stand up, but she was still very weak and need rest. But with what's happened, she didn't have the time for that. She scanned over the dead bodies and saw what remained of Commander Lefford. She limped past the wolves and fell to her knees when she reached his body. Both of his arms were torn off, as was his neck. The Valyrian dagger rested in red snow next to Lefford's hip. Arya picked it up and immediately began to trace the blade in an outline of Lefford's face. When Lefford first put on his face, the sensation was different. The pain in his arm was gone, and he was no longer cold. The makeshift bandage he made was stained with blood, but it ceased being soaked by it. The wolves around him stepped back, afraid of what they just witnessed. Nymeria and Ghost, however, still knew that the man before them was the girl they knew. Lefford still felt weak, but he immediately began to undress from the clothes of a girl and salvaged what he could from the faceless body and a few others. In about an hour, Lefford managed to piece together some clothes and armor that were free of any blood and damage. He strapped his sword belt around his waist and turned to the direwolves. He walked over them and brushed through the fur atop their heads. Thank you, he said before turning back and approaching a horse that didn't escape. As he mounted it, Ghost had already darted back the way he came, but Nymeria and her pack remained where they were. Lefford took one last look at them before spurring the horse down a trail nearby in the direction of Riverrun. Within minutes, the castle already came back into sight. A horn sounded, and the drawbridge was lowered down as he got closer to the entrance. Inside, a younger soldier took the reins of his horse as he dismounted and guided it back to the stables as other men approached him. Commander, did you find the girl? Where are the others? What happened? Quite, Lefford shouted. 7 hells, give me moment to say something, you cunts. The men quieted down enough for Lefford to not have to shout. Now then, I'm afraid that we found the girl. But she froze to death before we could question her. Not moments later, we were all set upon by a huge pack of wolves, and 2 of them were big fuckers, nearly big as horses they were. I managed to escape, but I'm not sure how many others did as well. We'll keep our eyes out on the way. On the way to what? Someone asked. Lefford pulled out a scroll with a broken seal on it that bore the crest of the Lannister lion. It was a complete fake, but no one even had to see its contents for Lefford to make up what was inside. I received a raven this morning from King's Landing before this whole shitstorm happened. We're ordered by the Queen to return to the Westerlands and wait for further instructions. We're going home? Not all of us. The Queen has ordered that 1,000 men remain in the Riverlands to keep watch for anything suspicious or troubling. They'll be under the command of Lord Edmure Tully, who's declared for the Queen. She's giving the Riverlands away, someone complained. If any of you have any shit about this, you're free to ride down to the Red Keep and tell the Queen that yourself, because I'm not going to be here in any of it. We have 6 days to pack up and leave, but I want every man in this castle ready in 5. There were many groans and complaints heard all around. Shut it, you cunts, or else I'll make it 3 days. Everyone immediately left the courtyard to go do something that was productive, except for the 3 lieutenants. They all joined Lefford in a walk to the castle. Commander, one of them said, are you sure about this? With only 1,000 men garrisoned here, we'll have no grip on the Tullys. This is only a ploy to confuse our enemies. With only 1,000 men, the Riverlands and the Northern rebels will seize the chance to attack, and once they do, we'll have them surrounded on all sides and wipe them out. We mean to sacrifice 1,000 of our men. No, we mean to sacrifice 1,000 traitors. Traitors? Another lieutenant asked. Come now, haven't you heard the faint whispers of our men turning their cloaks to the imp? Such disloyalty will not go unpunished. That was the best thing Lefford could think of to root out the soldiers, considering loyalty to Tyrion Lannister and securing more men for the wars to come. The lieutenants looked at each other bothered nervously, and seeing the logic in the tactics. By your orders, Commander, the 3 of them left as Lefford approached the doors to Rosalind's chambers. He opened them and proceeded inside, and found Rosalind sitting next to a small bed, drinking a glass of wine. Stefan was asleep in the bed, and there were also 2 handmaidens scrubbing the bloodstains out of the floor. Rosalind looked up to him, still shaken at what transpired. My lady, if we could speak alone for a moment. She looked puzzled at him, which told Lefford that his attitude towards her was not as usual. The handmaidens took the hint and left the room, closing the door behind them. Lefford walked over to an unoccupied chair at a table across the room, and sat down in it, exhausted. I have news of which I believe you'll be glad to hear. Your husband will be returning to Riverrun within a week's time from tomorrow. The Lannister forces will be returning to the Westerlands, save a garrison of 1,000. This news shocked Rosalind. She looked confused more than she'd ever been. Commander Lefford, why? Because I told everyone the Queen ordered it, which she didn't. I just knew that my men would listen to me since I'm their leader, and they believed me when I told them the Queen ordered it. Rosalind only looked more confused. But why? Lefford placed his right hand on his chin and grabbed his skin. He pulled up and returned to being Arya, causing Rosalind to become wide-eyed and mystified. Arya's arm felt a jolting pain, but she bore it in her. You're not a Stark, but you are a Tully, like my mother, and I will always fight to protect my family, even if yours killed her and my brother. Your family. Arya cut off, and if you want to keep it that way, then trust in me, and you won't be kept a prisoner in this room for much longer. Arya placed the face back on her and became Lefford once again. Winter is here, and a great evil is coming for us all. Daenerys. Ever since Jon was brought back inside the castle and put to rest in their bed, Daenerys never left his side the whole time he slept. It had been a whole day, and there was no change in him. His breathing was the same slow pace it had been the entire time, and he looked peaceful as he slept. She laid next to on his right, keeping her arm over his chest, feeling his heartbeat, praying that it would never stop. She felt the same way she did when before she smothered Drogo to end the illusion that was his life. But Daenerys would never let that happen again. She saw Jon walking out of the flames, and she saw his eyes return to the brown color she fell in love with. In all that time, anyone who had any business with Daenerys would have to come to her in her solar. Most of the time it was the lords of the north just paying their respects and well wishes to her and looking to see if their king really was alive or not. Some of the Dothraki that visited her had concerns about this, fearful what they witnessed and what they knew about Drogo. Daenerys did her best to reassure them that this wasn't like what happened the first time. The only person who never came to see her was Tyrion, and she understood why. He was blaming himself for Jon's current state, and Daenerys did have some anger towards him. It was his idea that led to Jon and the others go beyond the wall, which led to the death of Viserion and Jon. But maybe their lives are what paid the price for the children inside her, and if it weren't for that, she never would have seen Jon as one of those things. She saw what they brought back to show Cersei, but seeing Jon as one of them was what made her change her mind about everything. She didn't care about the throne, or Cersei, or who ruled Westeros. Daenerys sighed as she caressed Jon's beard with her fingers. It wasn't as thick as Daario's was, but she liked it this way. She ran her fingers down his neck and met his scar over his heart. It still hadn't healed, and neither did any of his other scars. She sighed as she thought of everything they've gone through. Their lives almost ran parallel to each other. All of a sudden, there was a knock on the door. "Come in." Daenerys sat up as the door opened, and in walked Varys. "Forgive me, Your Grace. I hope I'm not intruding." "No, it's quite all right. He's resting peacefully. I have news from my little birds about the Riverlands and in King's Landing." "Tell me about King's Landing." "Euron Greyjoy has finally appeared to the public and earned himself the name Iron Jaw. I take it the name explains why." "Indeed, Your Grace. He has called off his marriage agreement with Cersei and fled to Essos. I have spies at every harbor waiting for the ships with krakens to appear. Now there's nothing to stand in our way in the sea." Daenerys thought carefully about her next move. "Do we know how many of the Golden Company hold Dragonstone?" 3,000 men and 30 elephants. The numbers weren't a problem, but Daenerys didn't want to sacrifice more lives now that she's seen what would be coming. "I want you, Tyrion, Crenno, Lord Royce, and Lord Glover, make plans to reclaim the island, but only make them. Do not go through with them yet. If we can't come to a truce with Cersei, then we'll have to reclaim the Dragonglass mines by force. We'll use the Ironborn, and some of the Dothraki in the Reach." "At once, Your Grace. However, there is one problem. Lord Tyrion has been ignoring most of those who approach him, and has grown angry since he has been refused any wine, ale, or any and everything that could get him drunk." Daenerys sighed, irritated and disappointed. "Could you please send for him?" "Of course, Your Grace. Would you like to hear the news of the Riverlands now, or after your talk with him?" "After." Varys bowed to her and left. Outside, Jorah took a step inside to close the door for him, and resumed his guard. Daenerys got out of the bed and approached a table next to the hearth. She poured herself a tall glass of water, feeling parched. As she held the glass in her hand, she gazed into the fires of the hearth, contemplating everything happening and everything that could happen. If Cersei didn't agree to the armistice, then Daenerys would have no choice but to give up the kingdoms she's won to survive the coming storm. If her armies suffered heavy losses, then there could be the chance they wouldn't have the power to defeat Cersei afterwards. "No, we are going to destroy the Night King and his army." She drank her water and tried to shake away any doubts she had about the future. When Daenerys finished, there was a knock on the door. She sat down on a chair at the table and poured another glass of water for herself. "Come in." The door opened and Tyrion walked in. He looked like a mess. His clothes had wine stains, and his hair was ruffled. "You sent for me, Your Grace." He sounded tired, like he had just woken up. Daenerys gestured to the other seat at the table. "Sit down." Tyrion walked carefully, as if he was already drunk, and was keeping himself from tripping over his feet. He climbed onto the chair, and Daenerys poured some water for him. "No, thank you. If I wanted you to keep wasting away, I would have had wine brought." Daenerys pushed the glass to the edge of the table in front of Tyrion. "Is there something I can do for you?" He angrily took the glass and downed its contents, disappointed at what he drank. "You resigned your position as Hand before I could accept." "Then, by all means, please." He slouched back in his chair, waiting for her response. "I do not accept your resignation." Tyrion looked at all surprised. Instead, he just sighed and shook his head. "I've made too many mistakes ever since we returned to Westeros. I thought I could predict Cersei's moves, but she's changed ever since I left. Because of my strategies, I lost Durin, the Reach, and the Iron Islands. Because of you, we regained the Reach, and because of Jon and Theon, we regained the Iron Islands and the Iron Fleet, and after that I sent your husband on a monster hunt and got not only him killed, but one of your dragons. As far as I can see, I've fucked up as a Hand, more than Ned Stark did when he accepted his position." Tyrion sat up and poured himself more water, wishing that if he drank enough, he would feel something. You are right about that. As far as I can tell, battle strategy and military planning isn't your forte. It's true that we gained hardly anything by taking Casterly Rock, besides a strategic position. Olenna may be gone, but we've cut off the food supplies to King's Landing. Illyria is captured, but I've heard from Varys that thanks to you, it might not be for much longer. Tyrion stopped drinking his water and looked up at her, but didn't take any of what she said as positive reinforcement. You made the plan to have a ranging party go beyond the wall and capture a wight. You didn't order anyone to go, they volunteered. But the Septon and John returned to me like he promised he would. She looked over to him, still forever grateful he came back and for Melisandre's sacrifice. If I didn't see what he became and learned what happened to Viserion, I wouldn't have known what it truly meant to be afraid of the Night King. Seeing the man I love in that kind of a form, I never want to see that happen to any of you. She turned her head back to Tyrion. We have proof that the Night King exists, and thanks to you, we are ready to show the rest of the kingdoms the truth. Your skills are with diplomacy and telling others that sometimes the impossible ideas aren't impossible, just idiotic to do, and necessary. There was a knock on the door, and before Daenerys could answer, Jorah stepped inside. Your Grace, he said with concern. The Wildling clan leaders are nearly here, but there's a problem. What is it? She asked. They brought over 10,000 other wildlings with them. What? They haven't arrived yet. They're still about 3 miles before they get here. Daenerys looked over to Tyrion, who was just as concerned as she was. Clean yourself up, and by the time they enter the gates, I want you standing next to me, presentable, and as the hand of the queen. She looked over to the nightstand that Tyrion placed his pin on earlier. It hadn't moved from its position the entire time. Daenerys, Tyrion was unable to object. Until the meeting with Cersei is over, you will remain as my hand. Afterwards I will accept your resignation should you still desire it. He remained silent at her offer. He looked over to Jorah as if expecting some advice. As you wish, your grace. He got out of his septon, began to leave the room, but he first retrieved the pin from the nightstand. Said Jorah, would you get Missandei for me? Of course. Khaleesi. She liked that he would still call her that, but he only ever did it when no one else was around. Otherwise it was always your grace. Feeling much better than she did yesterday, Daenerys wore a thick warm black dress and a cloak Sansa had made for her that was similar to Jon's, except it had the Targaryen sigil instead of the Stark sigil. Before Daenerys made it outside with Jorah and Missandei, they were joined by Varys and Tyrion. I thought they would be arriving in 2 days. We all did, Tyrion said, but as we've just learned, the wildlings travel faster through the snows than northerners can. Makes sense, Jorah said. There's never any summer north of the wall. They all exited the interior of the castle and walked onto the balconies surrounding the courtyard. Several wildlings were inside and the rest of them waited around the castle in the fields as they continued to appear on the roads. In the distance, at least 50 giants and their mammoths were marching with the wildlings. In the courtyard, Sansa, Rickon, and Tormund were already speaking with the elders who arrived. Daenerys walked down the balcony stairs and approached the group. She caught the eyes of the elders as they all turned their attention to her. All but one of them had long beards, and even though they were elders, most of them were middle-aged. The one without a beard had no hair at all. Instead, he had scars that made shapes on his face, and he looked in his early 30s. Jon mentioned this kind of wildling was called a Thin, and they happened to be cannibals. But they all swore to end it when they were let through the wall. Are you the queen with the dragons? One them with ginger hair asked. Missandei stepped forward and announced Daenerys to them. You stand in the presence of Daenerys Stormborn of House Targaryen, rightful heir to the Iron Throne, Queen of the Andals and the First Men, protector of the 7 kingdoms, the mother of dragons, the Khaleesi of the Great Grass Sea, the Unburnt, the Breaker of Chains. All the wildlings seemed unfazed. Is she done? The ginger wildling asked. She is, Daenerys said, and who might you be? Garfield, leader of the Ice River clans. It's a pleasure to meet you, Daenerys made sure to show her courtesies no matter who she dealt with. However, I must admit that was only expecting 3 of you, not 10,000. Actually, we're 14,000, the Then said. The rest of us remained at the great stone hut you call the Dreadfort. That raises the question, Tyrion started, why did you leave the Dreadfort? Because there's fucking too many there, the ginger said. All the southerners in the castle kept getting into fights with us and told us to leave. Without a clan leader there to keep them in check, the people act like wild dogs. Even though we could have killed everyone there and taken the place for ourselves, we didn't because then we'd have to face your armies and your dragons. That's it? Tormund asked, disgusted. Is that the only reason you didn't kill anyone? It was hard not to. They kept on trying to put their rules and laws on us. We left them alone, but even when we weren't in the damn castle, there were men telling us what we couldn't do. We left the rest of free folk to make sure they knew who ran the place. And you thought that was the free folk. There's not even 400 of these southern fuckers there. We could have left our children there and we'd still take the castle. The wildling was suddenly grabbed by Tormund and thrown to the ground. Tormund got on top of him and started roaring as he punched the elder. The other elders backed away, nervous to face Tormund. After the ginger wildling's face was covered in blood and bruises, Tormund grabbed him by his collar and pulled him off the ground. Jon saved us from Hardhome, from the north. We fought with him against those traitors who stole his home, so we could be safe. He fucking died for us when he led us through the wall, and he died again and became a blue-eyed demon. After all this, you still complain and plan against him. Tormund dropped the elder to the ground and faced the others. The free folk lived north of the wall. Now we live with the southerners. We live by their rules and their laws. He turned to face Daenerys. We follow their rulers. Tormund, a voice called out. Everyone turned and looked up to the balconies and saw Jon with his arms on the railing, leaning against it. He only wore a loose shirt, some breeches, and his boots. Daenerys was overjoyed when she saw him and left the wildlings and everyone else. She quickly climbed up the stairs, and when Jon was within arm's reach, she tightly embraced him and closed her eyes. She was begging that this wasn't a dream, as she pulled her head back and gazed into his eyes. They were still brown and brooding, like they always were. She couldn't resist herself and pulled his head to hers and kissed him. She didn't care if everyone was watching them. He was hers, and he came back. As she finally released him, she pounded her fist on his shoulder. If you ever die again, I won't forgive you. I'm sorry, he whispered. I'm so sorry about leaving, about Viserion. Not now, when we have time for ourselves. Even though she wanted that more than anything, responsibilities had to come first. She looked up in his body, wondering why in any hells he would dress so lightly in the cold. You idiot, you'll freeze again dressed like this. I didn't want to waste time looking for you. He smiled and hugged her again. This time it was a soft one. He turned his gaze down to everyone and released Daenerys. They both walked down the stairs and back to the Wilden elders. Tormund quickly got a hug in himself, before they proceed with things. How many more times do you have to give your life for others? He asked. I hope only once more, when I'm late in my years. Tormund smiled as let go of him. I thought you said he turned. One of the elders said. He was brought back by a red woman and his dragons. Tormund informed. She traded her life for his. Care to explain why there's an army of the free folk here? Jon asked. Tormund looked down to the elder who was still covered in blood as he got up. Garfield had some concerns, but I hope with our conversation we just had, those are no longer a problem. Some of them are, the Fen said. The animals weren't bountiful enough to support all the people there, and if we stayed, then there would be nothing else to hunt by the year's end. The Southerners at the Dreadfort are angry without their lord being there. I can't be at the Dreadfort now, not until the war against the dead is won. Then maybe you should appoint a Castellan, Daenerys suggested. Is there anyone you could trust to do so? Jon didn't answer at first. He was thinking about what to do. He turned to the Fen who conveyed things better than Garfield did. How much supplies do the free folk who came with you have? Enough to last us 2 weeks. That's more than enough time. Jon turned around to everyone else. Gather all the lords and ladies who are still here and inform them to meet in the Great Hall as soon as possible. At once, Your Grace. Tyrion said as everyone did, as they were instructed. Jon turned back around to the elders. We'll settle things as best we can, if you'll join us. Of course, Jon Snow. He's not Snow anymore, Tormund informed. He's Jon Targaryen now. Doesn't roll off the tongue as easy. The Fen reminded. In Jon and Daenerys' solar, Jon began to get himself properly dressed, as Daenerys sat down at their table, drinking more water to quench her thirst. A lot has happened while you were gone. I noticed Arya wasn't here. Where'd she run off to? Daenerys was hesitant to answer, afraid of his reaction. She left to go reclaim the Riverlands for the Tullys by herself. Jon had just put on a long coat to substitute for his missing cloak. She left alone? From what I was told, yes. Everyone is confident she'll succeed, given that she was the one who killed all the Frey men. Jon just sighed heavily before turning around to face her. Why does there have to be war? She didn't know if his question was rhetorical or not, but she gave her best answer. I was told by Dario Naharis that as long as there are two people left in the world, someone would want the other dead. And what if it was just you and me? What if we woke up tomorrow and we were the only ones left? We wouldn't be along for very long. Daenerys brought a hand over her belly and smirked at Jon as he realized what she was implying. He couldn't manage to get any more words out of his mouth. You were right. I've been believing in an unreliable source of information. He smiled at her, but he looked sad. She knew he wasn't, but it was only looked that way. She stood and walked over and took his hands in hers. You're going to be a father to two beautiful children. Two twins? She smiled at him gently before he picked her up and spun her around in his arms. She let out a laugh before he kissed her. This moment had to be the happiest she'd been since their wedding. I love you, Denny. Jon set Daenerys down and looked into her eyes. Denny, the last person who called me that was my brother. The memory of him curdled her mind. He wasn't the best of company to keep, but I like it when you say it. They were interrupted by a knock on the door. Jon let go of Daenerys, so she stood beside him. Yes? He called out. The lords are waiting for you, Jorah said through the door. Daenerys looked to Jon, feeling unsure about this. Then let's not keep them waiting, she told him. Before they left, Jon tied his back in his regular style. In the great hall, the lords and ladies all took their seats and remained silent and mystified when Jon entered with Daenerys. Followed by Jorah, the two of them took their seats next to Sansa, Bran and Rickon, and Jorah remained on guard behind Daenerys. Before we begin, Jon said, is there anything anyone would like to say? No one said any for a while, until Lord Reed stood up, and all attention was on him. It's good to have you back, Your Grace. Everyone silently nodded, and there was a blissful peace in the atmosphere of the room. Lord Reed sat down and no one else said anything. Then let's get started. Jon stood up from his seat and scanned the room. He noticed Gendry was present, sitting next to Beric Dondarrion and Sandor Clegane. As you all know, a large portion of the free folk have traveled from the Dreadfort. I was informed that this was due to overcrowding, and the amount of food available was too scarce for 20,000. We can't house them all at Winterfell, so I ask if there are any who will volunteer to share their lands with the free folk. Ned Umber was the first to stand up. The last hearth can provide for 3,000 of them. I will also volunteer to take in some of the giants and their mammoths. Roderick Forrester stood up from his seat. I will volunteer to take a host of 5,000, Your Grace. House Forrester is in need of able bodies to help lumber the ironwood. The rest of the remaining giants will be welcome. We might even be able to make armor for them, if they'll let us. Wyman Manderley was the last lord to stand. I will take the remaining wildlings, and house them at Old Castle. We can restore it in the docks to make port for more ships that can trade for food and supplies for the coming winter. This was a surprise to Daenerys and Jon. The Northern Lords were known for their grudges against the wildlings, yet in less than minute 3 of them volunteered without hesitation or doubt. Thank you, my lords. I will make sure that when the war is over, this debt is not forgotten. Jon turned his attention to the free folk who were standing with Tormund on the left side of the room. When we're through here, meet with the 3 lords and discuss who will go where. Thank you, Jonson Targaryen, the Fen said. The 3 lords sat down, as Jon continued. There is still the issue with the free folk at the Dreadfort. I can't be there to rule over them, so I'll need to appoint a castellan who the others and the wildlings trust. Your Grace, Lord Forrester said. I have a half-brother who lived for some time beyond the wall with the wildlings. What's his name? One of the elders asked. Josura Snow. I know him, another elder said. He's a ward and has a sister, Elsera. Do you trust him? Jon asked Roderick. We have our disagreements, but he is my family, and I believe in him. That's as good as we can get. Send word that he is requested to rule the Dreadfort until I have the time to settle things myself. I will, Your Grace. Lord Tyrion, Jon said. Have you sent a raven to King's Landing? I did, Your Grace. We should be receiving a response any day now. Should Cersei accept or not, I want ravens sent out to each of the kingdoms, inviting 3 of the major houses to the armistice to come and see what we brought from beyond the wall. If you want 3 lords, then you already have the Stormlands, Gendry announced. Jon looked puzzled. He still didn't know about Gendry's naturalizing. I'll represent House Baratheon, and Beric and Brienne can come with me. Daenerys heard about Brienne's father, and that she didn't take it well, but she was recuperating little by little. I am still sworn to serve Lady Sansa and Lady Arya, Brienne informed, but if they will grant me a permission of leave, then I shall represent House Tarth. All eyes turned to Sansa for her decision. You completed your vows. Arya and I made it home to Winterfell as you promised our mother. My lady, Varys interjected, I have news of your sister and the status of the Riverlands. As we speak, nearly all the Lannister forces are preparing to march back to the Westerlands, and command of the remaining forces will be given to Lord Edmure Tully. This was all under the orders of Commander Cameron Lefford. And what about Arya? Sansa asked. Varys kept his complexion, but Daenerys knew him long enough to read his feelings, and he was grim. There was a report of an attempted assassination on Lady Rosalind and her son by a young girl wielding only a Valyrian dagger. She killed 1 lance under guard and critically injured 2, but Commander Lefford was able to stab her left arm before she jumped out of window and into a river. There was much discontent and murmuring sounded through the Great Hall, and the Starks, except for Bran, looked devastated. The report continued to say that Commander Lefford led a hunting party of 15 and returned alone. He claimed the girl died and that his men were set upon by a pack of wolves, 2 of which were of monstrous size. Ghost and Nymeria, Bran said. They saved her before they could kill her. Arya's waiting at Riverrun for Gendry to follow him to the Stormlands. She'll be all right. She's stronger than we give her credit for. Sansa wanted to say something, but she kept quiet, but still looked concerned, as did Jon. Lord Royce, Jon said, will you and Lord Arryn be able to represent the Vale? We shall, Your Grace. I will send a raven to him, and Lionel Corbeil. Very good. As for the Reach and Dorne, we'll send ravens to House Tarly and House Dane. We'll send a raven to Theon and Yara Greyjoy as well. What about the Westerlands? Rickon asked. Cersei has them under her control, and Jaime Lannister will all they need to represent them. If we could, Samwell said. He sat next to Lady Mormont and Lord Serwyn. I think if we send a raven to the Citadel, they'll be inclined to investigate. And once they see the truth, they'll provide some actual help for once. Many of the lords laugh at Sam's statement. Aye, Jon said. They could provide knowledge of things we don't know. Then it's settled, Daenerys said. We'll begin preparations for the armistice immediately. Not yet, Jon said. There is something else I need to say before we conclude for the day. Everyone gave their attention to Jon as he showed fear in his words. When I was a white, I could feel the mind of the Night King. It was like being a puppet, and the strings that held me up were made of steel. But I knew what he was planning. We thought he would be marching on Eastwatch, but we were wrong. He'll be heading for Castle Black once he gathers his full strength. Your Grace, Brienne said. Doesn't he already have his entire army? We saw the entirety of it at the Frozen Lake. It's not, Rickon said. The Night King has 70,000 more coming from the north to join the rest. We'll be facing over 200,000, and now he rides a dragon. This froze Daenerys. Losing one of her children to the Night King, and them having him brought back as nothing but a tool of death, felt just as painful as when she saw Jon with those eyes of blue. She couldn't bear to see him like that, and she can't bear to have Viserion be what he has become. We will be evenly matched, Jon said, but I know how we can win. This caused the murmurs to stop, and everyone had hope in their eyes. We won't wait for the Night King to come to us. We'll pull back every man on the wall, and when it comes crashing down, we'll ride out to meet him and his army. This caused a wave of shock and disbelief to fill everyone. When I fought at Hardhome and when we captured the White, the Night King gained the upper hand with the same strategy he will try to use again. He'll corner us with nowhere to run, and finish us off, but not this time. We will let the wall collapse, and when it does, we will face his army, and never let any of them set foot in the north. Many of the northern lords agreed, and nodded, confident. We have just over 2 months. We need to use every second we can to prepare ourselves. So let's all quiet talking and get working. Jon. Atop of a mountain in the lands north of the wall, Jon could barely see the great structure far off to the distance. Between him and the wall was the haunted forest and the part that was set ablaze as the great fire the North had ever seen. Without even realizing how, he was taken to the Fist of the First Men. He looked around and could still see the frozen horse corpses, partially buried in the snow. He walked over the two knuckles of the fist and looked out to the north. It was all as he remembered when he was first here. Despite the death and the evil he faced in these lands, he was glad to see them again. There was a certain beauty to them that nothing could touch, that made him feel at ease. Again he was taken to somewhere else. This time he had no knowledge of where he was. The skies were dark with cloud and night, but there were mysterious lights that penetrated to the lands below. Before him was a path leading to a lone mountain. Without even thinking, he found himself in the middle of it, at an altar of ice surrounded by a circle of ice pillars. Jon placed his hand on the altar and felt the cold run up his fingers and into his body. From the sky, Jon heard a deafening screech. He looked up and saw a dragon circling down to the mountain. He recognized the dragon to be Viserion, but his scales had changed from bronze to a cold white. As the dragon landed, Jon saw the Night King dismounted it and begin to approach him. Rather than run, Jon began walking to meet the Night King. Within moments, the two stopped and were face to face with each other. Surprising to Jon, the Night King started to clap his hands, applauding him. He didn't care though. Instead, Jon drew Longclaw from its scabbard and stabbed it into the ground. "You won't win," he said softly. "I don't know why you want us all dead, even after being one of your puppets, but I know that you won't win." The Night King didn't respond. Instead, he reached behind his back and drew his blade of ice and held it in both of his hands. Jon pulled Longclaw out from the ground and readied himself. The Night King made the first move and quickly swung his blade at Jon's torso, but it clashed with Longclaw and the two foes fell into a duel. But it wasn't to the death. There was no ferocity or rage in any strike. Jon was testing the Night Knight as he was doing to him. It wasn't until they came into a lock in weapons that Jon had to put strength into his force. Without warning, the Night King released his weapon and dropped it to the ground. Before Jon could strike, the Night King grabbed the back of Jon's head with one hand and placed his other hand on Jon's chest. He pulled his close, so that they were inches apart. He opened his mouth and a cold voice spoke to Jon. "Winter is forever." Jon woke up from his dream and felt colder than he did when he was submerged in the frozen lake. He slowly sat up, trying not to disturb Daenerys, who slept peacefully next to him, and got out of his bed. He put on some pants and his long coat before grabbing his boats and leaving the room. He walked throughout Winterfell and felt the cold disappearing even with his chest exposed. He didn't care about hiding his scars anymore, since he had already had to explain to every lord and lady how he got them. Jon soon found himself in the presence of his dragons outside of Winterfell. Ygritte and Lyris woke up from their sleep as Jon approached them, but Rhaegal remained asleep. His daughters nudged their heads against Jon, wanting him to pet them. He slowly stroked underneath their chins and felt complete to be with them. The two of them were large enough to have a rider. Daenerys told Jon that Rickon wanted to ride on them desperately. "What do you think?" he asked his daughters. "There are only 2 Targaryens, but 4 dragons. Will you look for someone to ride you?" Ygritte snorted at Jon's head, his hair getting brushed in a gust of air. Lyris, on the other hand, looked at him calmly with her golden eyes. Jon had the instinct to warg into them and did so. Through the eyes of his dragons, Jon felt their emotions as if they were his own. Ygritte was rejecting of what Jon said. She wanted to be riderless and free, but Lyris felt joy in such an idea. She wanted someone to be with her as she flew in the skies. Jon returned to himself and stared at his dragons, happy that they chose him. He gave them each one last caress on their snouts, before feeling the desire to return to his solar. He left them and began walking back to the castle, wishing that things could be like this forever. As he walked through the gates, he made his way up to the balconies and was met by Daenerys. "What are you doing out of bed?" he asked quietly. "I was afraid that I only dreamed that you came back. I had to find you to make sure." He gave her a soft hug and kissed the crown of her head. He remembered when he told Melisandre not to bring him back if he died again. But he didn't feel that way anymore. He never wanted to leave Daenerys ever again.
"I'm still here."
"I love you, Jon." She looked up to him and kept her eyes fixed on his. "I love you, Dany. Will you come back to bed with me?" "Of course I will." Jon gently intertwined his fingers with hers and they walked together hand in hand. Back in their bed, Jon held Daenerys in his right arm and rested his left hand above his heart. Daenerys slid her hand across his chest underneath Jon's hand. He didn't feel ready to go back to sleep, so he just stared out of the window of their solar, watching snow fall outside. "Will you sing me your song?" Daenerys whispered. "I want our children to hear you sing it." Jon smiled and sung softly. "Though the winds of winter blow, they will never scare the crow. Never shall we knock death's door, for the lands above will soar. When the king comes striking down, our steel will break his crown. His touch turns all to ice. In the snows will be demise, and then the skies will fill with light. Our brothers have won the fight. The fires of the dawn will come, and the colds of winter undone. Then the one who was lost shall win, and the greatest of ages shall begin. When all finds peace in the end, the world forever will defend. The wolves will howl and the dragons cry. Through fire and ice together we'll fly." Daenerys looked up to Jon. "You added more. You don't like it?" Daenerys smiled at him and nuzzled her head on Jon's chest. "We love it." Davos. With the help of a wildling escort, Davos had managed to return to Winterfell in just over a week's worth of travel. He was glad to have made it in such time. The news of the ranging party returning directly to the castle on one of the dragons was surprising, but not as much as when he learned that one of Daenerys's had died beyond the wall. He was glad to be away from the wall. The constant looming of the giant wall of ice made him feel sick, and the men of the watch weren't as sociable as the men at Castle Blackware. And then there was the mysterious rider from beyond the wall who returned Longclaw at the tunnel gate. Davos kept it with him ever since. The thought of seeing the castle of Winterfell again gave Davos feeling of anticipation as he and his escort were on the roads of the hills just beyond it. However, those feelings vanished when not only the castle came into sight, but an army of soldiers with banners that held the sigil of a burning heart. More worshippers of the Lord of Light, and these in particular ones happened to be known as the Fiery Hand. The flaming tattoos on their cheeks made them easy to identify. If they were here, then there was a chance that the witch Melisandre was here too. His grip around the reins of his horse tightened, and his teeth clenched. He spurred his horse into a fast gallop, leaving the wildlings behind him. It wasn't long until he passed through the gates and into the courtyard. As the horse came to a halt, Davos noticed that everyone in the castle was working twice as hard as they did before he and the others left. Everyone had a look of determination in their eyes, but there was also a small bit of fear behind it. His gaze turned to the forge that Gendry was given, and he wasn't expecting the fires to out. Gendry himself was walking with Sandor Clegane, Brienne of Tarth, and the one-eyed Dondarrion Lord Beric. Something Davos wasn't expecting was Gendry to be dressed in fine clothes and wore a gorget with a Baratheon sigil, but it was different than any of the 3 stags flown by the Baratheons during the War of the Five Kings. The sigil was only the head of the stag resting on an anvil, and the crown around the neck was gone. Davos walked over to them and earned a smile from Gendry. "This a new fashion for smiths?" Davos asked. "There was problem making the Valyrian steel," Gendry informed. "I'm not sure what, but Sam's looking into it as much as he can. As for me, I'm going to the Stormlands to take my place as Lord of Storm's End." "Lord? You've been naturalized?" Gendry proudly nodded at him. "That explains the sigil then. My family's words are what define the downfall of them. We claim the fury is ours, without any means behind it. So when I become Lord, the Baratheons will have new words. We forge the fury. I like it. These 3 coming with you?" "Indeed," Beric said. "We're to be the ones to support the boy's claim to his birthright." "We were hoping you'd come with us," Gendry informed. "Me?" Davos asked, flattered. "I need people I can trust to help me be a lord. I can't think of anyone else better than you." "I thought that's what they were for." Davos gestured to the 3 who followed Gendry. "We're just supporting his claim," Brienne informed. "I haven't known Lady Tarth very long. Clegane's coming because he wants to, and Beric sold me to the witch." Davos had completely forgotten about her. "I noticed the army of fire worshippers on my way here. Is she here too?" "She was," Gendry said, "but she died the day she got here. Executed by the king, I hope." "She traded her life for his," Beric interjected, aggravated. "Jon died beyond the wall and turned into a white, but her magic and sacrifice brought him back to life." Davos was lost for words for a moment. He wanted her dead for everything that happened because of her involvement with Stannis, but serving Jon, she kept giving reasons for him to not want to. He wouldn't ever forgive her for burning Shireen, but he couldn't help but feel grateful for bringing Jon back, especially now that he has a wife, and thanks to one of the wildlings who escorted him, he learned Jon was going to be a father. Then she has faced justice. When will you be leaving? As soon as we receive word from the Riverlands, Brienne informed. Arya secured them from the Lannisters, and we're waiting for their troops to empty out before we leave. Then if that's all, I need a heavy drink and a word with the king. I expect he'll be wanting his sword back. Davos gripped Longclaw, which was worn around his waist. He bowed his head to them and excused himself. Oh, he ceased his pace. I nearly forgot, my escort will be here soon with your things you all left at the wall. Finally, Sandor said. The next couple of days were mostly spent strategizing the offenses the current forces loyal to the Targaryens would use when the dead would arrive at Castle Black. Jon would ride Rhaegal and lead Ygritte and Lyaris to battle against the Night King and Viserion, while Daenerys and Drogon would flank the army of the dead from the north. The archers and infantry would hold a line at Castle Black after the wall would fall, and the Dothraki would flank from the east and west. The only problem was that they were outnumbered without the other kingdoms. If they could defeat Viserion, the dragons could focus their attacks on the bulk of the dead, prevent any escape. Davos had been working with Tyrion and Varys to form a plan to steal Cersei's wildfire stores and smuggle what they could to the wall. But after much anticipation, a raven from the Riverlands arrived, informing the Tullys had full control once again. After some counsel with Jon, Davos was granted leave to advise Gendry and join his escort to the Riverlands, eventually leaving for the Stormlands. They would be accompanied by 20 Northmen and 20 Knights of the Vale, who would ride with them until they would break off for the Vale, returning to the area with Lord Royce. Presently, Davos was walking with Gendry, who was leading him, and Jon to his solar. Everyone else who was leaving was preparing their horses and a cart of supplies for the journey. Davos and Jon weaved through many busy people, while Gendry slipped through with ease. Finally clear of everyone, Davos, Jon and Gendry stood in the forge, waiting for Gendry to inform why he brought them there. I felt bad I was only able to make the one sword, so in my spare time, I've been working on something to make up for the failures. Gendry approached a cloth that was draped over an armor stand and pulled it off, revealing his work. Underneath was a fantastic set of armor made for Jon. Gendry had made a pair of steel half-gauntlets, both covered the entire forearm, and they each had the Targaryen sigil in the elbow plating. A new gorget that had a dire wolf facing forward with rubies for its eyes, and connected to it were steel pauldrons that were lined with fur and had 4 steel plates flowing, the shoulder to the arm. The upper section was designed to be worn over Jon's black armor. For the legs were 2 greaves that covers the front of the legs. Both of them had a feather pattern etched in them, similar to the pattern that was on Jon's wedding attire. Jon and Davos were both marveled at the work, Jon not being able to resist feeling the dire wolf on the gorget. "This is beautiful," Jon commented. "It's the best work I've ever done," Gendry informed. "Only wish I had the time to make a helmet." Jon smiled at him, pleased with what he was already given. "I'll manage without one." "Then it looks like this is farewell for now." Gendry set the cloth on a table and approached Jon, giving him a hug. "Thank you for everything." "Good luck." They let go of each other, and Davos followed Gendry out of the forge, while Jon took another moment to look at the armor. 2 stable boys were holding the reins of their horses, waiting for them to be mounted. The caravan was nearly ready, only waiting for a few riders and 4 bannermen, one to carry the banners of each house they would be representing. The Stark soldiers carried the banners of Stark, Tart, and Gendry's Baratheon sigil, while the Knights of the Vale carried the banner of House Arryn. Jon had some banners of House Dondarrion made, but Beric refused them, saying that he had no banners anymore. He was currently saying his goodbye to the archer, Anguy, who decided to stay in Winterfell to help train the archers. Davos noticed Lady Brienne and her squire, Podrick, were getting their saddles ready as Tormund approached Brienne. He held a dragon-glass dagger to her. The quality of it had to be the best Davos had ever seen so far. It was simple, but the handle was made of bone of some kind, carved into bear. This was the first time Davos saw the lady not look reviled to be in Tormund's presence, as she took it and even smiled at him. Davos, Gendry said. Are you ready? Are you? Gendry shook his head, but he smiled while he did it. 7 hells no, but I hope you'll help me to be.
Aye, that I will.
The two of them mounted their horses and all was set. Jon and Daenerys stood with each other off the side to see them off. Beric rode at the head of the caravan and was taking the lead. We ride hard for the Riverlands, Beric shouted. Let's remind the world that winter is here. He spurred his horse out of the gates, and the caravan followed suit. The moment Davos rode out from the gates, he couldn't help but feel a loss of security. Beric wasn't lying when he said they would be riding hard. It felt like he was trying to outdo the speed of the wildlings, but he was still slower than them. But they arrived at the Twins quicker than planned, and Riverrun even quicker. But throughout the entire journey there were many awkward moments when they would pass a Lannister encampment. The enemy soldiers would stand and keep their hands on their weapons, but never took up arms against them. Outside the castle on both sides of the rivers that ran under Riverrun, there were many Riverlanders wearing Tully armor, and not a single Lannister soldier was present. The caravan halted at the drawbridge entrance and waited for the it to lower for them. Instead of entry, the guards on the battlements pointed crossbows down to them. Who goes there? One of them called out. Davos trotted his horse to the front of the caravan and stopped next to Beric. We come from Winterfell, on behalf of King Jon Targaryen and Queen Daenerys Targaryen. We seek an audience with your Lord Edmure Tully. The guards scanned the men of the caravan and left the battlements, but the rest of them kept aiming their crossbows. Minutes later, the guard returned and gave a signal to the men. They raised their crossbows away, and the drawbridge began to lower. The moment the edge of it connected with the bridge, Davos and Beric led the others into the castle. Inside, they were greeted by about 50 more Tully soldiers in the courtyard, all of them giving caution. They lost the castle once, and they didn't look intent on losing it again. Once everyone was inside, the drawbridge raised back up and a men escorted by 3 guards approached. My lords, he said, we've been expecting for you. I'm Edmure Tully. You're most welcome here. Lord Tully, Davos said, I'm Sarah Davos Seaworth. Is the Lady Arya here? My niece is resting in her chambers. She's still recovering from her wounds. My maester is tending to her as we speak. That's good news. May I be the first to present Gendry of House Baratheon? Gendry walked forward, bowed his head to Edmure. Baratheon? Edmure asked, intrigued. I'm the last living bastard of Robert Baratheon, Gendry informed. I was naturalized by Queen Daenerys. That's wonderful to hear. These wars have ended too many great houses from the world. You must all be weary from your travels. I've rooms prepared for you and your men, and if there's anything you have need of, only ask. Thank you, me lord. Davos cleared his throat at Gendry. My lord, Beric and Davos did what they could so far to turn Gendry from a smith from Flea Bottom into the Lord of Storm's End. But there was far much more work to be done. If I could, I'd like to see Arya. Of course, my lord. I'll take you to her myself, while your men get situated. Edmure began to lead Gendry into the castle, as his men assisted the Stark soldiers with their horses. Brienne followed closely behind them, as did Davos. Upon reaching the door to Arya's chambers, Edmure knocked twice before an elderly maester opened the door and greeted them. Lord Edmure, the maester said. What wonderful timing. She's just woken up. Do come in. Actually, I'm afraid I have other matters to attend to, Edmure replied. I shall take my leave. Edmure left, as everyone entered into the room, and saw Arya in a large bed under the fur blankets. She set down a metal trinket she had in her right hand onto a nightstand next to the bed, and then everyone saw her other arm bandaged and set in a splint. Lady Arya, Brienne said. She quickly walked over to the side of the bed and knelt down to her. I must be honest and express my frustration at you for doing something so rash without any help. Lord Reed told me he offered help, but you refused him. What were you thinking? I was overconfident, Arya said. Shame was present in her voice. This surprised Brienne, and even Davos. Arya had always been so sure about things, and never doubtful, yet here she was in full humility. I thought I could do things quick and easy, but I got carried away. I thought I was better than I was, and I paid the price for it. If it wasn't for Ghost and Nymeria, I would have died. Brienne was speechless. Davos knew she probably had a lecture prepared, but it seemed it wouldn't be necessary. Out of all the concern, Gendry chuckled to himself a bit, Everyone turned and saw him, and smirking at Arya. Have you noticed that things turn to shit when we part ways? Arya was amused at his remark, and let out a small bit of laughter. More reason for me to go with you then. Brienne was about to object, but Davos placed his hand on her shoulder to stop her. She turned her head to him, and he merely arched his brow, as if she really thought things would be any different. Brienne sighed and stood up. How much longer until your arm heals? Earliest I was told was just over 1 moon, but I'll be sure to get better before we even get to King's Landing. Then, just in time for the dead, Gendry openly said. We received word about that. Edmure didn't believe it at first, but after a conversation reminding him of his failures, he's agreed to go to King's Landing with Tytos Blackwood and Janos Bracken. Why them? Davos asked. I've heard the Blackwoods and the Brackens have bad history. They still do. But Edmure said that if Jon is trying to unite the realms for a better purpose, maybe he could do the same with his vassals. Smart move, Davos replied. Probably the first one he's ever made. Arya jested, although she might not have been wrong about that. So when will we be leaving? Tomorrow afternoon, Gendry informed. Hopefully we'll be resupplied by then and have secured a safe route to the Stormlands. My lords, my lady, the Maester interjected. It's time for me to change the lady's bandages, if you wouldn't mind leaving us. Of course, Davos said. We need to consort with Lord Edmure anyways. The Maester bowed his head to them, and Arya just gave them a small smile, but she looked the tiniest bit sad, as if she didn't want them to. Regardless, Davos and Brienne left the room. Gendry followed slowly, giving Arya one last look before he closed the doors. Gathered in the main hall of Riverrun, Edmure had just finished going over his troops' movements with 2 of his captains. With most of the Lannister forces gone, the Riverlands are free to declare for the King Jon and Queen Daenerys. Edmure said, taking a drink from a wineglass he held. Glad to hear it, Davos said. Now only 4 more realms need to. When the meeting with Cersei happens, that will hopefully be the turning point for everything. I do have some concerns, however. The reason it's happening at all, for example. You claim there's an army of dead men marching on the wall. The largest and most dangerous in the world. Impossible. The White Walkers are just a story. Brian sighed at his remark. I thought so too, she said, but then I saw them beyond the wall. I saw their army, I fought them, and I slew one of the walkers. Edmure just shook his head at her, disbelieving everything she said. You have to understand how that sounds from my position. Such a thing is hard to believe without proof. Which is exactly what we brought back from beyond the wall. Edmure sighed. He looked tired. I'll go to this gathering, but until I see such a thing, I don't think I can believe it. I don't blame ya, Davos said. I didn't want to believe it either. Even when I saw that damned creature at Winterfell, I still didn't want to. But only when I saw it did I realize that it couldn't be ignored any longer. Edmure just looked at his wineglass and took another drink, pondering what was said. There's something else I'd like to discuss, he said, changing the subject. I've sent a raven to Winterfell, asking for what justices the King and Queen have in store for the remnants of House Frey. The King and Queen have decided that the twins are forfeit to any claim the Freys had. Since all the men are dead save a few babes, there's not much contending going on. That's true, but what about the remaining family members? Since the women had no part in the Red Wedding, they're declared innocent. The king wants to remind the realms that a child isn't responsible for the sins of the father. The fate of the Frey army hasn't been decided yet. Edmure scoffed. Most of the Frey soldiers surrendered and have changed their allegiance to my vassal houses, but those that didn't run amok and cause trouble. But it won't be much longer until the bulks of my forces are Tullies. So then the twins are without a lord, Brienne stated. Not for much longer. I plan on giving them to a lesser house that remained loyal to my uncle the Blackfish. Actually, Davos said, I'm afraid that the twins were already given a new lord. What? By whose authority? The Queen's. There's someone in King's Landing working as an insider for us, and he's close to Jaime Lannister. Davos pulled out a small scroll from his pocket that was stamped with the Targaryen sigil. There's a debt owed to him, and the Hand promised to double it if he switched sides with us. Admira took the scroll from Davos and unraveled it, reading its contents. This doesn't make any sense. I've never heard of House Blackwater. It took about 3 drinks in for Jaime to finally acquire a taste for the ale in Flea Bottom. He and Bronn were enjoying the company of some of the Golden Company sellswords. Despite the fact that the tavern was filled to the brim with men, women, soldiers, and whores, Jaime preferred to be here rather than in the Red Keep. Ever since a raven from the Westerlands came, Cersei had been in a fit of rage. When they learned that almost the entire Lannister forces garrisoned in the Riverlands left under false knowledge, Jaime had to do his best to keep his sister calm. She wanted to kill 500 of those men to set an example, but all Jaime had to do is remind her that they were already outnumbered. This kind of behavior had to be bad for their child, yet Cersei continued to grow in her rage, but now things were beginning to calm down, ever since the raven from Winterfell came. Tyrion sent it informing that they were ready to meet. What he failed to mention, that Qyburn's little birds didn't, was that he sent ravens to all the other kingdoms, inviting 3 lords to attend this meeting as well. If the Targaryens succeeded in uniting the other lords with them, then the war would be truly lost. Bronn had just finished teasing one of the many prostitutes around them, before he leaned closely to Jaime to whisper to him, "I just got word from my boys inside the city watch. The food stores are near empty, and will only last another 3 months. After that, the city's fucked." He pulled his head away and finished his beer. "What about the Westerlands?" Jaime asked casually as he drank down his ale. "The good lords have plenty of food for them and their people for the winter. Too bad we're in the Crown Lands, and even the Queen's power won't force them to turn over their stores. Can we smuggle anything from the Reach? Maybe a little bit, but who will? The Tyrell gold's gone, so there's no one to hire." "All of it?" Jaime was sure that there was plenty remaining, after giving the Iron Bank their due. "I'm not sure about the details, but Cersei invested it into something that'll gain the upper hand in the war to come." As Jaime felt a headache suddenly come over him, and massaged his temple. That gold could have bought them more food from usse merchants. A small part of it could have paid smugglers to steal from the Reach. Cersei was keeping more and more things from him. As the days passed, and if continued like this, then the Targaryens would lay siege to a city of skeletons. "Would you quit your damn moping already?" Bronn asked. "There's still a chance to win. It's just not reachable by anyone without dragons and a bigger army than yours. And from what I heard, the men who stayed in the Riverlands are doing the smart thing and switching to the side that has that chance." "Well then, why don't you join them already?" Jaime asked, irritated. "My brother already offered you a castle and a highborn lady. What's keeping you here?"
"You are."
Jaime turned his head, surprised and even flattered, but that was only because he was starting to get drunk.
"I like you, Lannisters," Bronn said. "If it weren't for you lot, I wouldn't be where I am today."
"So I'm making this offer only once. After this meeting with the Targaryens happens, I'm going with them to face whatever it is the fuck they're fighting. That isn't you. It's an army of dead men. Did you know that?" Jaime playfully asked. I heard. But luckily for me, I'm good at 3 things. Surviving, fighting, and fucking. You on the other hand, or your only hand in your case, are good at 2 things. Commanding armies and being a pawn to your sister." Weeks ago, Jaime would have tried to punch Bronn, but ever since their talk in Littlefinger's brothel, he couldn't help but feel that Bronn was right. If you need more proof, do one of 2 things. Go to the Black Cells and ask Aliera Sand how she's liking her stay along with every other prisoner your sister put there since a certain queen arrived in Westeros, or stay with your sister and die in your city. Bronn got up from his seat and stood right behind Jaime, placing both of his hands on Jaime's shoulders, squeezing them. "You should try to calm down a bit, maybe find a woman who isn't blonde." Bronn patted Jaime's cheek and left the tavern. As conversation and laughter boomed around him, Jaime sat quietly, as if defeated and had no purpose. He finished his ale and set the empty mug on the table before getting up and leaving. Outside of the tavern, 2 guards that were his escorts stood at attention and followed him as he left. "Are we going back to the Red Keep, my lord?" "Yes, but first we're going to the dungeons." The Black Cells always had a foul stench to them, but the thought of rotten shit sounded sweet and fragrant compared to what lingered in the air now. Moans of pain echoed throughout the halls of men and women alike. There had never been as many prisoners before now. Jaime, followed by 2 of his men, were escorted by Qyburn to one cell in particular. The guard that stood watch over the door unlocked for them, and Qyburn decided to wait outside rather than go in. Jaime slowly walked in with a torch in hand. The contents of the cells disgusted him as the light bled inside. On his right was a woman with as much flesh as a skeleton, chained to the wall. Her wrists were riddled with scabs and blisters. and if not for the sound of raspy breaths, Jaime would have thought her to be dead. On the other side of the cell, lying on the ground, was a decaying girl's corpse, dressed in tattering Dornish clothing. Her right arm was ripped from her body, and dangled on the shackle it was chained to. Maggots crawled up and down the face and body. Jaime was horrified at the sight. Cersei never told him what she did to Eliara and Tyen, but that was probably because Jaime would have done something about this. He walked over to Eliara and knelt down to her. She didn't look at him, but she didn't look like she could anyway. The colors of her eyes were paled and cloudy. "Can you hear me?" Jaime asked. The only confirmation he received was a longer exhale she managed to do. Jaime looked down to the ground, ashamed of this. "I hate you. I do. When I first saw the blood drip from Mycella's nose, and she began to die in my arms, I wanted nothing more than to sail back to Dorne and put your head on a spike. After you, I would have done the same to all of your bastard daughters." He lifted his gaze back up to her. "But it's not human." Eliara breathed out something that sounded like words, but they were far too quiet to hear. Jaime leaned his ear to her, nearly touching it to her lips. "I'd save her." Jaime looked back at the corpse rotting on the ground and sighed. "Jaime ain't dead." Eliara just kept breathing, the same words over and over again. Tired of what he saw, Jaime drew his dagger and without hesitation, he stabbed Eliara at her heart. She didn't even flinch when the steel pierced her flesh and was pulled out. Jaime's dagger slipped out of his fingers as he stood up. He didn't bother to retrieve it. He just left it on the ground, and he exited the cell and started walk back, the way he came. He couldn't help but wonder how many more were in such a condition. His escort followed him closely, and Jaime decided he needed to be alone. "I won't be needing you two anymore today." "But Sir Jaime, we've been instructed by the Queen to accompany you," one of them said. Then they turned around to face them. "And I'm instructing you to fuck off. If you're still following me when I exit the Red Cap, I'll give you the honor of dying by a Valyrian steel sword." Jaime turned back around and kept walking, leaving his escort where they stood as they followed his orders. He didn't understand what he was feeling, but he wanted to be alone. As he wandered through the streets of Flea Bottom in the early of the evening, looking for somewhere he could drink without being surrounded by sellswords and soldiers, Jaime was stopped when he heard a woman singing. It was a song he'd never heard before, and the tune was soft and inviting. He decided to follow the song to the singer, and saw a young woman at the corner of the road, playing a harp as she sang. She had long brown hair and had a fine figure. Her face was beautiful, and her voice matched her looks. He caught her eyes and she gave him a small smile, inviting him closer to her. "Lovely song," he said. "I can't say I've heard it before." "It's a new one," she told him. "Did you compose it yourself?" "No, the king did." "The king?" As far as Jaime knew, there was only one person with that title in Westeros. You'd call the bastard of Winterfell your king when you live in a city ruled by the rightful queen. The women held back her laughter, but amusingly smiled at Jaime. "I know who you are, Jaime Lannister. Anyone would when you carry such a sword and wear your hand of gold so openly." Jaime looked down to both his sword and hand, unsure of how he let such an obvious detail slip past him. "And yet, you denounce my sister as your queen all the same. I'm a northerner. We have something that very few of you have south of the north." "And what's that?" "Honor." The woman set her harp down and leaned it against the wall of a home. "Your sister murdered hundreds when she blew up the Sept of the Baelor, including Queen Marjorie, and rumors are going around that she's running out of food to feed us. As for the Lannisters who are dead, your father played a great part in the Red Wedding. Joffrey was a cunt. Everyone knows that, even you." She wasn't wrong about that. "The only Lannisters I thought were good souls were King Tommen and Princess Myrcella, but it was all because of your sister that they died in the first place." She wasn't wrong about that either. Tommen loved Marjorie even if she was manipulating him. But Myrcella's death happened because of him, Tyrion, Cersei, and their father. If Cersei had listened to him, Tyrion might have been spared from a trial, but him letting Tyrion free led to their father's death. But then again, all of this was because the great Tommen Lannister ordered the death of babes, and hated a dwarf he was forced to call his son. If you tell right now that the country would be better with them still alive, I will find the nearest gold cloak and give myself up." Jaime shook his head at her. "Were you here then? If you have no allegiance to Cersei of this country, why don't you leave? The woman's brow arched high. You're right. Tomorrow, I'll get on the next ship sailing for White Harbor and go home. There are no ships leaving for White Harbor. Oh, that's right. We're at war, and the ships are being used to defend the city. In that case, I'll pack up my things and travel on foot, with no money or protection to get me there. Jaime felt like a fool for assuming as much. Cersei had raised the cost of food and living to a great amount to pay for the war. It was then that he realized something he missed from her earlier statement. What about me and my brother? What? You named my sister, my father, my nephew. She gave him a glower for not stating the obvious. My son, but you didn't mention me or my brother. The MP might be a Lannister, but he's doing the right thing supporting King Jon and Queen Daenerys. As for you, there are few who know why you killed King Aerys. Jaime's expression went blank for a moment before regaining his composure. You don't look old enough to remember the Mad King? No, I was only 5, but my mother was servant in the Red Keep. She told me how you saved the city from wildfire when you broke your oaths. You fulfilled your vows as a knight to protect the innocent. But even then, you couldn't stop your father from sacking the city. She gave him a small smile that lifted his spirits up a bit. I know it might be late, but thank you doing what you could. This was the first time Yo was ever thanked for what he did without having to tell someone about it. He felt a new feeling rush over him hadn't felt many times before, only when he talked with Brienne. You know, it wasn't even an hour ago that I killed someone. Who was it? Ilyarasand? The one who killed Myrcella. Jaime nodded his head and sat down in a nearby barrel. I hated her with every bit of myself, as I could. When I saw her brought before Cersei in chains, I felt satisfaction. Cersei told me she killed Elyara's daughter with the same poison that killed Myrcella. Again, I felt satisfaction. I never went to see her in her cell until today. I thought she would be dead by now. In fact, I prayed to the gods she would be. But instead, I saw her barely holding on to her life, and her daughter's corpse was still rotting in front of her. The North woman looked saddened when she did. Why is it that when I saw her like that, I felt regret for the woman who killed my daughter? I don't know. She walked up to Jaime and planted a small kiss on his lips without any resistance from him. Why did I do that to a man who fights against my king? Jaime couldn't resist her any longer, and pulled her back to him, and kissed her more. He didn't know why he desired her, he didn't even know her name, but she didn't lust after him like Cersei did. She was comforting. She brought him to her home, and they both embraced each other for the entirety of the night. Jaime had only ever been with Cersei, yet this felt far greater. It felt like what we longed for from his sister, but never got. Before the sun rose with the first light, Jaime had already dressed himself as the woman lay asleep in her bed. Before he departed, he left her his entire purse and wrote a note on a parchment for her that read, "Sing in the North." As he passed through the gates of the Red Keep, he was stopped by 2 of the guards. "Sire Chenier," one of them said, "the Queen has summoned you to appear before her." "This early what for?" "She didn't say." "Septon, if you'll please follow us." Of course. Jaime had no idea why Cersei would be up at this hour. It was daybreak, and she never woke up this early. When he finally appeared in the throne room, Cersei was sitting on the Iron Throne, and the Mountain stood next to her, being ever protective. Jaime finally made it to the base of the steps. "You sent for me, Your Grace." He noticed purple bags under her eyes, and she was radiating with anger. "Sir Jaime, I understand that you killed our hostage in her cell, but you were kind enough to leave the weapon you used. She was mad about Elyara's death. I only quickened her fate. She wouldn't have lasted through the next moon anyway. It's a miracle she lasted as long as she did." "It wasn't a miracle, it was because I made it so." Jaime became estranged. "I had Qyburn giving her something that would have prolonged her life in that state. But you ended it. Tywin was rooting in front of her. You had your revenge and there was no reason to keep her alive." "No reason. Now that she's dead, Dorne has no reason to hold back their armies anymore. We had leverage against them, but you threw it away. You were torturing her beyond what she deserved." "What she deserved? She murdered Myrcella and declared for the dragon whore. Who are you to decide what she deserved?" Chenin slowly walked up the steps to the throne until he stood above Cersei. "Myrcella knew about us," he spoke softly. "She knew I was her father, and those few seconds I held her in my arms was the only time I've ever been able to be a father to any of our children. And I've been a mother to them their whole lives. Cersei blinked a few times as if waking up from daydreaming. But I can forgive you for this. Only if you do something for me.
What?
Cersei looked past Jaime and nodded at a guard next to the doors of the room. He and one other opened them and 2 gold cloaks walked in, dragging someone with them. Jaime turned around and realized it was a woman, but it wasn't until they reached the foot of the steps did he realize who. They threw down the North woman and she slowly got up to her knees. Her face was bruised and bloodied from many beatings. When she looked at Jaime, she didn't look angry or sad. She looked sorry. "Kill her," Cersei ordered. Jaime looked back at her, his mouth open with disbelief. "I told you never to betray me again. If you want to prove that, then serve justice to one who would support the usurpers in the north. If you refuse to do so, you will be displaying loyalty to the Targaryens, which is punishable by death. Cersei, I am the queen. You will address me properly in court." Jaime looked down to the North woman who nodded at him, ever so slightly. He knew she didn't want to die, but she wanted him to live. His hand shook as he slowly gripped the hilt of Widow's Wail and unsheathed his sword. He walked down to steps, and when he was in reach, he rested the blade on the North woman's shoulder. She looked directly at Cersei before boldly speaking. "Winter is coming." Jaime raised the sword up, only needing to swing it down to complete the deed. But instead, her let go of the sword and let it clang to the ground. He turned around to face Cersei. "I am a knight, sworn to defend the innocent, not to murder the defenseless." Cersei stared him down, but her response was calm. "That's fair. You're my brother, and I can understand the importance of meaningless things to men, like honor and duty." Her gaze turned back to the North woman. "But the sentence still stands, and since you do not want a beheading, I thought of something better." Before Jaime could react, the mountain pulled him away, as the gold cloaks dragged the North woman away from the steps and to the center of the room. The mountain wrapped his hands around Jaime's arms and held him in place, as a third gold cloak entered the room, carrying a small keg with him. As the 2 men holding the woman released her, the third uncorked the keg and poured a familiar green liquid on her. Before Jaime could object or do anything, one of the men struck a flint and the yellow sparks ignited into green fire and the room filled with screams that he never wanted to hear again. As the flames rose and scent of the air turned to burning flesh, Jaime lost the strength in his legs, but the mountain held him up. He wanted to close his eyes, but he couldn't seem to. Even when the body stopped moving and the fires began to die down, Jaime could still hear the screams. He looked over to Cersei and saw her smirking at what remained. Davos. It felt good to see the mighty castle that was Storm's End once again. The great fortress built into the cliffs, against the sea, hadn't changed, save for the absence of any Baratheon banners. The tower in the center of Storm's End touched the clouds of the aftermath of a light rain. The snows of winter did not yet arrive, but the cold winds did. The caravan was only a few miles away, and already a group of riders from the castle were approaching them from the castle. Davos and Beric rode at the head of their entourage, followed by the Lady Brienne and the Hound. Gendry had fallen back to ride next to the carriage that Lady Arya rode in. She could have traveled by horse if her wound had healed quicker, but she was confined to a luxurious ride much to her dismay. The window to the carriage was open and they were in the middle of a conversation as the riders got closer. "Gendry," Davos called. Gendry looked over to him and realized what was going on. He spurred his horse forward towards the others and slowed down when he caught up. As the riders from the castle reached them, the caravan came to a halt, except for Davos, Brienne, Beric, and Gendry, who all rode next to each other along with 2 men following behind, carrying the Stark banner and the new Baratheon banner. One of them rode forward, an elderly man dressed in plate armor and wearing a surcoat with the sigil of a green shark in a black ocean, beneath a blue sky. "My lords, I recognize some of you, but not all. I am Sarah Jasper Willem, the appointed Castellan of Storm's End. I'm surprised you came back, Dondarrion, after renouncing your lordship and claims." "I was needed elsewhere," Beric responded, "and if you're worried I've come to take back what I gave up, that is not my purpose." "Then what is?" Beric looked over to Gendry and Ser Jasper's gaze followed. "This Gendry," Davos announced, "last surviving bastard of Robert of the House Baratheon, naturalized by Queen Daenerys Targaryen, rightful Lord of Storm's End and the Stormlands." The men who followed Ser Jasper looked at each other in surprise as he rode closer to Gendry and inspected him before turning his attention to Davos. "You're loyal to the Targaryens now, Seos, Werth, the house that Robert waged an entire rebellion over." "I am. I hope you received one of the ravens we sent out about the truth of the rebellion." "We did. It was hard to believe, but we believed it nonetheless." "But why are you following them? Why are you following the Mad King's offspring?" "You know the saying, every time a Targaryen is born, the gods flip a coin and it lands on either madness or greatness. With all that's happened, it's safe to assume they landed on greatness, and after seeing what's coming for all of us from beyond the wall, we need everything we can get."
Ser Jasper turned his gaze back to Gendry.
"I've lived in this castle my whole life and I only ever saw Robert a few times after his rebellion. I must say you do look him." Ser Jasper turned to Ser Davos. "Are there any others to support his claim?" "I do," Brienne said. "I am Brienne of House Tarth, Lady of Tarth, and the Evenfall Hall." Ser Jasper bowed his head to her. "My condolences to your father, my lady."
Thank you, sir.
"I support him as well," Davos informed. "I think we know each other enough to skip the introduction, Jasper." The knight smiled at him before returning his gaze to Gendry. "Tell me, are you good with a sword?" "Not at all," Gendry informed. "I prefer a hammer." Ser Jasper kept his smile and slowly nodded at Gendry. "Just like Robert, welcome home, Lord Baratheon." The inside of Storm's End wasn't like any other castle. The entire keep was built for one thing when it was first raised, and that was war. Even with the years that passed since its birth, the castle remained as it was. No lord would dare be foolish enough to remove any of the castle weapons. The walls had many catapults built into them facing the land and the sea. Davos, Beric, Brienne, the Hound, and Gendry were brought to the war room, while Arya was sent to be treated by a maester. The war room was very large and spacious, and located in Center Tower. The room was surrounded with wooden benches, with the backings up against the walls, and in the middle of the room, carved into the floor, was a great map of Westeros. The stone dipped and rose from the floor, copying the elevations of the country. Ser Jasper took a seat in one of the benches, after telling a servant to fetch drinks for them all. "So, my Lord Gendry, what are your intentions?" Davos was ready to speak for him, but Gendry stopped him. "It's okay," he told him. "I can do this." Gendry walked over to the Crownlands and loomed over King's Landing. "I was told the numbers of the Stormlands army were 4,000. "That is correct. We need them ready to venture to the north immediately after the meeting with Cersei Lannister." "I had a question about that, my lord." Jasper stood up from his seat and walked over to Gendry. "What is it exactly that's coming from the north?" Gendry looked at him for a moment, not saying anything to him, but it looked more like he didn't know what to say. An army of dead men was the truth, but they weren't in the north anymore, so it wouldn't be as believable as it was to others. "Why don't you accompany us to King's Landing and see for yourself?" "My lord, you honor me with such an invitation." Gendry looked back to the map, but now his gaze was on the Stormlands. "Which houses are the major of the Stormlands?" "House Baratheon now, Houses Tarth, Dondarrion, Swan, and Wild. I need one lord or lady from 2 of those houses to accompany me to the meeting. Any you'd recommend?" "My lord," Brienne interjected, "forgive me for my assumption, but I was under the impression that Lord Beric and I would be representing the Stormlands with you." "You don't need to ask for forgiveness. The 2 of you were my first choices, but then I realized that you've already seen what's coming, and you fought them. I need people who haven't seen what you have, so they can realize the truth of what's really at stake." "Makes sense," Beric said. "Lady Brienne and I can help organize the armies for the journey north, while you worry about the meeting with Cersei." "Sounds good," Gendry said. "So Ser Jasper, who do you recommend?" "If the Lady of Tarth won't be able to, then I would suggest Lady Ramona of House Dondarrion and Lord Curtis of House Wild, since their troops make up the most of our forces." "Then let's get a raven sent to each of them. Invite them here first, and we'll travel to King's Landing together and meet with the others. While that's all taking place, send a raven to the Iron Islands with a request to ferry our soldiers to White Harbor." "At once, my lord," Ser Jasper said, before 2 servants entered the room. One of them brought water glasses for everyone, but the other went directly to Ser Jasper and whispered something to him. Oh, thank you. I can't believe I completely forgot. Is there a problem? Davos asked. Not at all. However, there is a gathering of the castle's residents in the main courtyard. They're hoping to see their new lord. How many are there? Davos asked. Just over 400 people. Gendry turned pale when he heard that. He never was one to desire being the center of attention. It's all right, lad, Davos said as he walked up to Gendry and patted him on the back. They just want to see you and hear a few words. Couldn't I just be silent? Be pretty awkward if you did. Gendry thought about and nodded his head as he took one of the glasses of water from the servant and gulped it down. As they came outside, Gendry stood at a stone railing in the middle of two staircases that both led to the courtyard grounds and beheld a great massing of common folk. Davos stood close to him in hopes it would be comforting, but he could notice Gendry's hands were starting to shake. The silence started to drag on before Davos nudged Gendry's foot with his own. Clearing his throat first, Gendry stood up straight and raised his voice. My name is Gendry Baratheon, last surviving bastard of King Robert Baratheon. This caused much muttering amongst the people, but Gendry pressed on. I was naturalized by the Queen Daenerys Targaryen, who I have pledged my loyalty to. I understand that there will be much discontent among many of you. My father waged a rebellion against her family, after all. Davos was getting the feeling that he would have to step in soon. Gendry was backing himself into a corner. But such things don't matter now. Winter is coming, and the storm that follows is one we won't live through if we continue things the way we are. We can't afford to let the quarrels of the past get in the way of our survival and our future. I promise you, all now, I will do everything in my power to make sure that get us such a future. Gendry stepped away from the railing and began walking back into the castle, Davos following closely. Could have been better, Davos commented, but not bad. Do you where Arya was taken? Follow me. Davos didn't blame him for desiring her company. She was the only one he could talk to as a friend, and not an advisor. Though there were times he and Gendry would have moments like that. But that's all they were. Davos waited outside of the room Arya was given while she and Gendry conversed. The door was left open, and he occasionally snuck a glance and listened to their voices. At one point he noticed Gendry holding Arya's right hand in both of his, moving his fingers over her skin and inspecting every detail of her fingers. It wasn't until he saw them start to lean their heads close together that he took a step back from the doorway and gave them some better privacy. A few minutes later, Gendry came out of the room and closed the door behind him. How much time do we have before we leave for King's Landing? Gendry asked. The ravens were sent. If all goes well, maybe 5 days. More than enough time. Gendry patted Davos on the shoulder and wore a smirk he couldn't be rid of as they walked throughout the hallways. Is there anything that needs my attention today? At the moment, no. Good, then I need to find a forge. Arya. The next couple of days were steady, as Gendry was able to make time for all of matters that required his attention, and at the end of each day he would spend the rest of his time at the anvil. The forge he was given pleased him greatly, as it was twice the size of what he had in Winterfell, and his tools were of the highest quality. He didn't let anyone in to watch him, though. He said he had a project he couldn't let anyone see until it was finished. Many people were bustling from one place to another. Gendry warned them all of what was coming, and now he needed them prepared. The air was filled with the sounds of hammers striking hot steel, constant chatter among farmers delivering grain, and the clashing of wooden training swords belonging to young lads wanting to become soldiers. On the third day of the arrival, Davos was welcoming Lord Wild and Lady Dondarrion into the keep. After they met with Gendry and Beric, Davos brought them into the war room, organizing the movement of the Stormlands forces to the north. They hadn't received word from the Greyjoys yet, so they had to resort to either marching or gathering what ships they had to ferry the soldiers. But before they could even go through with anything, they had to wait for many of the lords who had men to provide swear fealty to their new lord. He was in the war room with Sir Jasper, standing next to the Stormlands. Arya was finally allowed to out and about to her own business. But she was still not allowed to practice yet. But her wound was nearly healed, so it would only be a few more days. She was in Great Hall sitting at a table across from Sandor, Brienne, and Podrick. She never spoke to the Hound much, even when they first saw each other at Riverrun. They just acknowledged that the other was alive. This actually bothered Arya, but she tried not to show it. Arya was given a serving of salted sea bass, and Brienne had the same, but Sandor stuck with eating a chicken. He tore through the meat of a wing, while Arya struggled to just cut a small piece for herself. The fish nearly slid off the plate, and Arya was starting to become frustrated. Here, Sandor stole her plate and knife and cut her fish for her. Should have gotten the chicken. You can just use your hands, the whole time. He slid her plate back to her with her fish cut up and resumed to eat his food. Where'd you go after you left me rotting in the Vale? Bravos. I learned how to become a faceless man. Sandor snorted at her. And yet you still got stabbed in the arm? I wouldn't aggravate her if were you, Brienne told him. She can fight just as well with both hands. Doesn't matter, the Hound spat back. She still took a knifer in the arm. Arya didn't allow herself to get angry with him. He was right, and it was her arrogance that caused her to make such a mistake. So tell me, girl, are you still dancing, or are you fighting? Arya looked up from her plate at him. Both. Though she was glad they were finally talking, she wanted to change the subject. I heard you joined the Brotherhood without banners. I didn't join those cunts. I only traveled with them. Wound up spending a month at Eastwatch, in a cell until your king brother freed us. You went with Jon beyond the wall. Didn't know why we were going. I just wanted out of the cell. The men of the Watch are nothing but foreigners from Essos and cunts from the Seven Kingdoms who hate wildlings. Is there anyone you don't think is a cunt? Brienne asked. Nope. Arya smiled as he bit into his chicken, hardly giving attention to anyone else. It made her feel like she was home. The Valyrian dagger was kept at Arya's side whenever she wasn't inside the castle. The remnants of needle rested on her nightstand in her room. Regardless of being unable to train, the winter days felt longer than they did in summer. Arya was alone on the top of the Tower of Storm's End, looking out to the north and reaching her hand up to touch the low storm clouds that came close to her. Of all places to be, you had to choose somewhere up the most fucking stairs in the world. Arya turned around and saw Sandor resting his hands on his knees, exhausted. You're getting old, Clegane, Arya told him. Last time someone said that to me, I killed the closest person next to me. What do you want? Sandor caught his breath and walked over to her. I was bored and wanted to see if you're still as shit a fighter as you are a dancer. Brienne said I shouldn't fight until I'm healed. Fuck what she says. Do you think if you lose an arm on the battlefield, you wait for it to heal? Sandor drew his sword and pointed the tip onto the stone floor. I heard how you lost the hand. You have speed, but you lack strength. If you could have used that fingerless soldier's sword, you would have made it in one piece. He drew a smaller sword stud aside and handed it to Arya. Now show me what you've got. Arya held the sword in her hand and felt the weight and shape of it. It was no Braavosi blade, but it would do. She held it behind her back and waited for Sandor to make the first move. In an instant, he raised his sword and swung it across at Arya. She ducked under it easily and slapped her sword on Sandor's sword hand before attempting to bring the tip near his neck. His sword moved quickly and parried it away. Arya retreated a few steps back to create distance between her and Sandor's reach. He rushed forward at her, but instead of waiting for him to come, she advanced and let her knees fall to the ground and slid forward, dodging the swing that would have sliced at her. Using the pommel, Arya slammed her sword on the back of Sandor's knee, causing him to buckle. Before he could recover, Arya spun around and charged at his back, shoving him forward and onto the ground. As he rolled over, Arya dropped the sword and drew her dagger, jumping on top of Sandor's chest and held the blade to his neck. Yield, she ordered. Sandor mockingly smiled at her. I told you, you have speed. He quickly grabbed the blade and with little effort, pulled it from her hand and tossed it to the side. But you lack strength. He lurched forward and cupped his hands underneath Arya's shoulders, and lifted her off the ground. Fucking hells, couldn't you have grown even a little in the time we've been apart? Shut your hole and let me down! He set her to her feet and retrieved his sword, while she retrieved hers. Sandor picked up the dagger and inspected it. Valyrian steel, if I had a great sword made of this, I'd finally be able to cut off my brother's empty head. He offered the dagger to her and she accepted it, after she returned her sword. You name that thing as well. No, it wasn't mine at first. I don't know if it had a name before though. Keep it that way. You're already a girl with a broken named weapon. You don't need another, but you will need something bigger against the dead. Arya chuckled at him and the dagger was returned into its scabbard. Did you learn all that in Bravos? It's a long story, but you could say learning was a punishment for killing someone. I wasn't supposed to. And who was that? Mereen Trent. Sandor burst into heavy laughter after she said, "Who? You killed Mereen fucking Trent?" Oh, I always knew he could be bested by any little girl with a sword, but he had to actually do it. I didn't use a sword, I had a knife. Sandor burst into laughter once again, and Arya couldn't help but laugh with him a bit. "Kill anyone else on your list?" he asked, as he calmed down. "Walder Frey? That was you." Sandor looked at her before staring out into the distance. "Now it makes sense. I heard Walder poisoned his whole family before turning into a young girl." He looked back at her impressed. For the first time Arya ever saw him. "You wear people's faces?" "I don't, no one does." "The fuck is that supposed to mean?" "To wear a face, I have to be no one. If the faces are worn by someone, they're poison." Still doesn't make any fucking sense. "If I put on a face you didn't know I did, and then I walked right past you, who would I be?" "Nobody I'd care about to ask, but what if I know it's you? Then I'm someone wearing another person's face. That's what I can't let happen again." "What happens if you do?" "I went blind for a while, the first time I did it. I'm not sure if that happens every time, but there is always a punishment." Sandor just shook his head. "Enough talk. I need some ale. I'll join you." On the day of the departure, 10 Greyjoy ships arrived at First Light, with Theon, Yara, and 2 other of the Ironborn lords. Arya wasn't pleased to see Theon at all. In fact, if he hadn't rescued Sansa, he'd be on her list. She was nearly done packing her things before there was a knock on the door. "Yes?" she called out. "It's Gendry," he answered. "Come in." The door opened, and Gendry stepped inside. Both of his hands were behind his back. Hanging on his belt was a new warhammer he forged. It was similar to his first one, but this one was meant to be used by one hand and was only his arm's length. "I heard your arm's finally healed." "It did," Arya replied as she revealed her left arm. It was unbandaged and revealed a terrible scar still in a light shade of pink. "I made you something, if you'd want it." Gendry pulled his hands out from behind his back, and Arya beheld a water dancer's sword. The length was a few inches longer than Needle was, but she had grown since she first laid hands on her sword, so this one was just the right size. The hilt was similar to Needle, except the pommel had a howling dire wolf etched into it. "I thought you could use a gift for your recovery." Arya took it in her hands and inspected the blade. Fresh forged steel always had a glimmer to it. "It's beautiful, Gendry." "Thank you. I thought about giving it a name, but then I realized that should left to you." Arya thought about what Sandor said and decided that he could fuck a goat. She wanted a name for her sword, but thinking of one that had meaning at the moment was a challenge. "I'll name it after I spill blood with it,"